All right, everybody, welcome to the Tuesday, May 14th work session here in the City Hall chambers in Athens-Clarke County. As soon as we achieve a quorum, we're going to enter into executive session for following our work session for one item of property management. And we have 5 items on the agenda tonight, including a return visit from our SPLOST Citizen Advisory Committee in the form of Dr. Shannon Wilder. And then 4 other items as well. So we'll begin with Dr. Wilder. So I'm going to call her up to the microphone. We, of course, had another visit earlier this calendar year from Dr. Wilder. The Citizen Advisory Group has done yeoman's work, and they really have come to their final set of recommendations for us. And Dr. Wilder is going to go over those, and we might have some conversation afterwards about how we will move this to the final recommendation that will go in front of the voters this November. So I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Wilder. Thank you, Shannon.
Thank you, Mayor Kurtz. Well, I'm glad to be back with you to present the final work of our candidate project list for the SPLOST 2020 Citizen Advisory Committee, and I am joined by at least a couple of our committee members tonight. We've done a lot of work since our last meeting with you all on March 26th, and in order to come to this final list. And I'm going to give you just a brief overview of our process and timeline since the last work session, and then present the projects that we have selected as candidate projects for mayor and commission's consideration. So just to brief you on our updated timeline, after our work session, we did hold a public meeting on the SPLOST 2020 CAC, which we had good attendance and good conversation. We got many comments. On April 22nd, we met to do our second straw polling for our candidate list of projects, and we actually finished that in one evening. We then submitted that on April 26th to the mayor and commission, and then tonight, of course, is our work session presentation, which will be followed again by a public meeting this Thursday to actually go over the candidate list and give the public an opportunity to provide additional input. So, as you all know, since January, we have reviewed 88 separate projects totaling nearly $1.2 billion and $5.7 million in operating costs. In addition, the committee also considered 44 alternate projects totaling nearly $327 million. From this, we pared this down to a list of 34 potential projects that we presented on March 26th. These totaled about $299 million, which is 121% of, at that time, the available SPLOST 2020 funds. After hearing from the CAC, the mayor and commission then pre-designated around $150.5 million for the space modernization, affordable housing, debt service, and Winterville and Bogart SPLOST projects. And of course, this substantially reduced the scale and scope of the funding available for projects under consideration by the Citizens Advisory Committee, although we certainly recognize that it's the mayor and commission's ultimate role to designate all SPLOST dollars. We will have some comments, though, at a later date. We are going to submit a written report on kind of a postmortem on our process because we do think this did have an enormous impact on the committee's work. So we also, the SPLOST 2020 CAC was also asked to consider adding 3 projects to the second straw poll that had already been eliminated from consideration, but that could actually help to reduce annual general fund capital costs. And then as part of our process, we also reviewed all the comments from our public input session on April 10th. And again, we had good turnout, and this was very, I think, helpful to our final deliberations. So in total, we had, this is just a summary of the funds allocation. So after the last, the SPLOST funds were increased to $278 million, effectively making this a 10-year SPLOST. The total of the projects pre-designated by mayor and commission was $147.5 million. Winterville and Bogart SPLOST projects will total about $3 million. And so the number that we were working with for our final straw polling was $127.5 million. It's really important to remember as we consider what projects were included in our second straw polling that we were not going back to the drawing board. So, we started with these 88 projects, and we were actually considering a greatly reduced list. So the projects that we previously did not recommend were actually not included at all in the second straw polling. And so this immediately took 44 projects off the table for consideration. And so that's, half of all the projects that were submitted. In addition, of course, we also did not include the pre-designated projects. But we did vote to include 44 projects in the second round that included all the projects remaining on our previously identified potentials list, and that was about 33 projects. The 3 projects that we were asked to consider because of their impact on the general fund capital costs reduction as requested by Mayor and Commission, those were number 3, which was the facilities life cycle equipment, public safety vehicles replacement program, and number 40, the parks facilities improvement. And we did vote to include those in our final list of projects under consideration. And then we also had 8 projects that we decided to add that were on our list of neither recommended nor rejected in the first straw poll. So that again left us with 44 projects to vote on. So we held our second straw polling process on April 22nd. We had 5 rounds of voting that evening for the purpose of developing our candidate list. The voting system was the same process we used previously. It was set up for each committee member to vote for up to $127 million of the projects in each round of voting. As projects were recommended by consensus, the total amount left was in subsequent rounds was reduced by the amount for the projects that were then recommended. And then the projects that did not receive a minimum number of votes in each round were eliminated in subsequent rounds. I do want to clarify, because I've had a few questions about this, that as an advisory committee, we did not have the latitude or the authority to negotiate or recommend parts of projects. Or to specify a reduced dollar amount for any projects. So we couldn't alter the proposals. Our charge was to review and recommend the projects as they were put forward. So during voting, we had the original projects, and then occasionally we had the alternate projects. And so we would vote on what was put forward. And I would say, in conversation, there were certainly instances that it would have been nice if we could have done that, to pick an amount to allocate to a project. But that was outside of our charge, and it certainly falls to the responsibility of Mayor and Commission to designate and work more directly on the revision and refinement of the project scopes and budgets. So we are recommending 22 candidate projects totaling $127,494,000, and this represents about 46% of SPLOST 2020 funds available. There are a lot of interesting ways to break this down, but here's some ways to look at it. We have $20.5 million that is dedicated to continuation of SPLOST projects, and that's about 16% of our candidate list. 46% of the candidate list are proposals that were put forward by ACC departments, whereas 54% of the list represents proposals put forward by citizen and community groups. 59 million are alternate projects, and 68 million are original project proposals. These 22 projects would result in a $784,000 increase in general fund operating costs. And as a reminder, we were asked to keep that figure under $4 million. So even with the pre-designated projects Mayor and Commission has included, SPLOST 2020 would be well under this figure. 2 projects, number 11, Public Safety Vehicles Replacement Program, and number 32, Fire Department Equipment, would help to reduce general fund capital costs by about $1.4 million. They total have a combined price tag of about $13.5 million, which is about 10% of our candidate list. And then our candidate projects range in cost from about $300,000 for our lowest cost recommended project, which is the Sandy Creek exhibit modernization. And then the most expensive on our list is $15.5 million, which is the Gaines Youth Development Campus. So just as a reminder, part of the selection criteria we used was based on those criteria outlined by Mayor and Commission that focused on long-term contribution to countywide equity, sustainability of resources, and ACC prosperity, benefiting all citizens in 3 areas: economic prosperity, environmental protection, and social well-being. And if you look at this pie chart on the left, this chart includes all projects, so the total $278 million. So this is CAC recommended as well as Mayor and Commission pre-designated projects. The pie chart on the right gives the breakdown of only our candidate list of 22 projects totaling around $127 million. And I think there are obviously some differences here, most notably in the economic prosperity classification, and this is mostly due to the fact that the space modernization project is in this category, and it also includes a proportional split of the debt service for this project. By focus area, each project has a focus area: basic facilities and infrastructure, quality of life, and public safety. Again, the pie chart on the left includes all projects, so the CAC recommended as well as Mayor and Commission designated. The pie chart on the right gives us the breakdown of only the 22 candidate projects. And again, you can see the biggest difference is that the Citizens Advisory Committee's list, I would say, is heavily weighted towards quality of life projects. And the difference here is that, again, with the space modernization project, that was in the facilities and infrastructure area. So you can certainly see the difference in that breakdown. Again, before we look at the candidate list in detail, I had presented some of our guiding principles during my last presentation, and just as a reminder, these were still principles that we kept coming back to in our second round of straw polling, and that emerged throughout our process. And so I do think it's important to consider. We're not, whether we achieve these principles is, one thing, but these were the things that we discussed at great length during our deliberation processes. So for our list of 22 Citizens Advisory Committee candidate projects, I've decided, and I've taken the liberty of organizing these into categories that really attempt to represent the CAC's discussion and deliberation about community priority areas so that Mayor and Commission can better understand some of our reasoning and thinking about these projects and their potential value in a bit of a more nuanced way than, say, looking at them through project focus or classifications. And so the first category is conservation and preservation. And while Beach Haven Park and Tallahassee Forest Park were both also presented by community groups as potential West Side parks, the CAC felt they were also important environmental conservation projects, as well as in the case of Beach Haven, an important cultural and historic preservation project. And the fact that these projects can also be educational resources for underserved schools that are in close proximity, as well as areas for play and recreation, is also a plus. So in addition, these projects also represent green space and land that's already owned by the county but has yet to become accessible to the public. So funding these projects would allow the public to use these spaces as they were meant to be while also conserving them for generations. Another category that we considered was economic development, and this includes the airport capital improvement plan and the new recovered material processing facility. And of course, there are many projects that could fit under multiple categories, and we could have certainly added high-speed wireless broadband here and included the recycling facility under sustainability. However, both of these projects also provide major economic benefit to the community. The airport capital improvement plan is an important area of public investment to spur private investment by new and existing industries. And there was also great interest among the CAC members in the potential for airline passenger service based on promising catchment data that we were presented. And in addition, the new recovered material processing facility provides not only needed improvements to recycling and reuse infrastructure, but also reductions in materials sent to the landfill. We felt that this just made good business sense. It creates jobs as well as potential new revenue from end use of recovered materials that can be sold to manufacturers. And given what's happening on a global scale with countries no longer accepting the U.S.'s recyclables, it makes prudent economic sense for ACC to be proactive in this area. There are various infrastructure and facilities improvement projects on our list. The animal shelter project would renovate dog runs as well as some public spaces. It's also a continuation project for renovations that were not included in the SPLOST 2011. Now, and the public safety vehicles replacement program was one of two projects on our list that resulted from Mayor and Commission's requests that we consider projects that would reduce capital fund costs, and this project would result in a $1.1 million offset of costs. I think it's fair to say that it was ultimately recommended based on this request for consideration of projects that would provide reductions to the general fund. This was one of the projects that was not on our original potentials list. In addition, the ACC Recycling Creative Reuse Space and Facility Relocation is a companion project to Project 49. And at the heart of this project is renovation to the current facility at Hancock Industrial Way after a new facility is built, but it would also allow existing programs at 1005 College Avenue, like CHARM, teacher reuse, and Keep Athens-Clarke County Beautiful Tool Shed to move to the renovated Hancock Industrial Way space, which then would open College Avenue potentially for sale for private development. In addition, we felt that this space would provide educational space as well as a place where functional discarded material could find a new use or potentially also be sold. One of the areas that we've been asked a lot about is parks projects. We got a lot of feedback about various parks projects at our input session. And I think even some of our commissioners have asked about this. So, and one of the questions has been, why are there so many parks projects on our lists? It's a good question and an interesting one. So I would say there were quite a few projects submitted from both recreation and leisure services and citizen and community groups. And many, frankly, due to the serious maintenance and improvement issues that are needed, and others because of very active and engaged citizen groups who really love these facilities. And so on our candidate list, there are 4 parks projects that represent critical improvements and essential maintenance, as well as providing access to parks in underserved parts of the community. Most notably, Athens West Park is an alternate proposal that is essentially about land acquisition to establish a park in West Athens, which is an area of the county with little access to parks with amenities similar to Bishop, Memorial, and Southeast Clarke Park. Holland Youth Sports Complex represents important safety improvements for this park. And this is a park that sees high traffic and it draws youth sports participants from across the county. Memorial Park was the highest priority park on the Recreation and Leisure Services priority list. And, you know, frankly, this project addresses emergency improvements that just really have to happen. Things like preventing future catastrophic failure of stormwater features that could potentially affect surrounding neighborhoods, not only the park. We had a lot of conversation about the state of our parks, and it's clear there's a backlog of maintenance and serious issues that need to be addressed, and they're not adequately funded through the capital budget allocation process. And I know I'm preaching to the choir when I say our parks are beloved in this community, and many like Memorial, Bishop, Bear Hollow, and Holland have, frankly been loved to death. And so we just asked the mayor and commission to give serious thought and consideration to how ongoing maintenance is addressed. It was one of the, just since we started SPLOST deliberations, Cook's Trail has been closed indefinitely, and it was one of many project proposals that really represented, critical repairs and improvements that was under consideration for SPLOST 2020, but frankly, probably proposed too late. And as we contemplated building new parks, which is certainly part of, if we're looking at the Athens West Park, the CAC did have a lot of concerns about how they will be maintained. There was one of our projects that was not recommended was the Parks Improvement Fund for around $24 million. And in the end, I think the consensus of the Citizens Advisory Committee was that there would be more voter support for projects that earmark funds for particular parks so that citizens would see and know where funds are going. And also because we saw that the user groups of parks really turn out to support these projects. And so we thought they would turn out to vote. You all may have different thoughts with your understanding of the budget, but this was our reasoning. So I think the bottom line is that we feel that the parks need attention. They serve a critical function in our community for all citizens. We love them. They're a major regional draw. The citizens group representing these projects are motivated and organized and did a great job representing the importance of their parks. And we certainly ask that you seriously consider how we fund and maintain them. Another category that we felt strongly about was public safety, and it was a topic of concern for the CAC, and we are supporting a range of projects in this category. We felt that E911 phone system replacement was deemed essential for every citizen in our community. Replacement of Fire Station 5, which is our oldest fire station, will serve outlying portions of the eastern part of the county and provide comparable facilities to other newer fire stations, including a community room. Project 32, Fire Department equipment, was also not only an important health and safety equipment fund for our first responders, but it also has the added benefit of being one of our two projects that could have a positive impact on reducing annual general fund capital costs at around $227,000. And we also heard from groups about the Vincent Drive sidewalk and the public safety issues. We felt there are many worthy sidewalk projects, but we felt this was one that is overdue for attention. And our sustainability and environment, it's fair to say that our group was very interested in these types of projects, and we are recommending 4 different projects. All of them have a different focus, whether it's environmental remediation or working more towards 100% renewable energy. But we urge you all to consider supporting some of these sustainably focused projects. And then finally, we have a range of projects that are focused on education and youth development. We felt that high-speed wireless broadband throughout the county that's affordable and accessible is vital to education, and it also has many other positive benefits for ACC citizens. And of course, also depending on how it's implemented, could also be a revenue source for the county. But there are economic, public safety, business, and educational benefits for families, children, and our schools for this project. The East Side Library project was one of the first projects recommended in both the first and second straw polls, and we see this project as a top priority for the East Side in particular to increase access to library and educational resources, as well as the many programs that the ACC libraries offer to children, youth, and families. And associated with this project is the Gaines Youth Development Complex. This project was put forward by the Clarke County School District to redevelop the old Gaines Elementary site to a college, career, leadership, and early learning campus. And this would provide needed services to an underserved part of town. And we certainly can also consider, we encourage Mayor and Commission to consider co-location of both the library and Gaines Youth Development if agreements can be brokered that would with the school district and ACC libraries. So in summary, all of these we think are important projects that the CAC believes would strengthen our community in many ways. It's perhaps not a perfect list, but it's a thoughtful one that we've worked for 4 months to develop through many discussions. I would say a healthy share of disagreement and a lot of listening to one another to achieve consensus. I will say Appendix B in your presentation shows a list of 22 projects that were eliminated during the second round of straw polling to join the other 44 that were previously eliminated. There are many wonderful projects on this list as well, and these certainly were not eliminated lightly. So as we pass on our recommendations to Mayor and Commission and you create your final list of designated projects that will ultimately be on the referendum for citizen approval, we hope that this feedback is beneficial and that I will say that I think the committee worked really hard to try to understand and educate themselves on a very large number of projects, and we are appreciative of the opportunity. I will say that, as I mentioned previously, we do have some suggestions for improving the SPLOST process, and we are going to be submitting a written report with feedback for suggestions to the Mayor and Commission. We felt that we have a lot to say in this regard, and we thought it might be more useful in written form with specific recommendations, and it's somewhat outside of the scope of our time here tonight. So, again, I do want to say thank you to our committee members. They spent a lot of time and effort going through these projects and just engaging, sharing ideas, and coming to consensus. It was not an easy task. And I want to say thanks also to Keith and his staff because they are fantastic, and we really have appreciated the support that they provided and the many long hours that they spent with us as well. So at that point, I'm going to ask if there are any questions or comments.
Before questions of Shannon, I know we have a couple other committee members with us tonight. I don't know if you want to introduce this.
Okay, I think we have, is it just Denny? You guys want to stand up? I think you all know Denny Gallus and Laura Carter. Oh, and Tom Loth is here as well. And Shane Blackwell. Okay. Anyone else I've missed? Thank you, guys.
Thanks, y'all. Sometimes we feel as if we have lengthy meetings, but these folks set the bar high for public meetings this year. So questions of Shannon, either about the process or about kind of how they derived the set of projects in front of us?
I'll get started with some questions. First of all, thanks again for all your work leadership-wise and to everybody in the group. I think that everybody on the committee will be great ambassadors for this referendum.
Absolutely.
That's going to go forward. I guess I'm curious if you could give me some more feedback on the public input. What sort of the individual community member versus the organized groups that you talked about that were, what did you say? Motivated and organized
Absolutely.
Groups. And then what would be the expectation for the last public session?
Yeah, so the last
Public input session.
So the last public session will be this Thursday, and it's really going to be in a similar format. So the last one we did a brief presentation, and then we had the projects that were still. Well, actually, it was all the projects. So we had them listed, and they were grouped as either on the potentials list, not recommended, or neither recommended nor rejected. And we gave everyone who came in dots so they could kind of vote for projects that they were interested in. We had comment cards, and then we had committee members who were around the room to engage in conversation. And we had a lot of really good conversation that went on. I would say, I think there were a lot of groups that, we had a number of these proposals that were put together by citizen groups. And they turned out to represent their projects. And I think it was a really good, level of engagement and interesting. It was interesting to see that because there certainly were projects, one in particular, I think it was the Athens-Clarke Park, wasn't it? That group, which that project had already been on the not recommended list, but we had a lot of engagement from that group. And there were a number of similar, but then there were also just some interested citizens who wanted to see what was on the list and talk with committee members.
Right.
So,
And with that feedback, because one of the things that I look at as I am beginning to look at
Yeah,
it,
absolutely.
or get deeper into it, is that idea of breaking it apart. Like you were saying, if it says $6 million to Beach Haven, it says $6 million
Right,
to Beach
exactly.
Haven.
So-
Did you get some feedback from the public that they wondered if some of the money couldn't be broken up? Or the project's allocations be
I don't know
altered?
that there was. I don't think there was anything like that. But I think there was more engagement just around the concepts for the projects than it was about the budgets. So,
Okay.
so I think we had people who were just interested in. They saw the potential for how certain projects could benefit different areas of the community or different citizen groups. So that was my takeaway from it.
Gotcha. So then this next one will be the public's time to comment on
We're
the
on the
last
candidate
group.
list. On
Yeah,
the candidate
specifically
list.
versus-
Yes. Absolutely.
And then Kelly, how does that come back to us?
So then we get to have a conversation about, what accordions we want to shift inward and outward.
So then we'll have a work session after their next public one where we're sitting and having like if I wanted to ask, gee, what could be done at Beach Haven that's not 6 million? So that we could and have more for potentially Bishop Park Phase 1. Are those kind of numbers stuff you're
We can have
wanting?
all those conversations about, what else could be modified in any of the project designs or scopes. And, allow us to probably have more sway than, as Shannon referenced, the citizen group did.
Right. And not so much today, but after their next public input.
That's right.
Okay.
Kelly, what might be helpful, if y'all agree, if you could submit those questions in advance, we can respond to it, send it all out, and so you've got it,
So, yeah.
and we'll copy everybody with all the questions.
What you're saying is don't hold those questions back. Just type them up and so we can get that feedback.
Might advance the discussion
Okay.
when we finally do
I
get
think
there.
that's right.
Okay. So I don't need to spend too much time trying to figure it out. I can go ahead
Right
and
now.
ask.
That's correct.
Okay. Thanks. That helps me know where we're marching forward.
Other questions about the citizen deliberation or process?
Well, I don't have any questions. I think this is a fine list. I think the Citizens Advisory Committee did a great job, and I know how hard it is. I just want to express great appreciation and gratitude for your work.
Thank you.
All right, so I think as Blaine referenced, the earlier the questions, the better. So maybe Allison will kick off the email to everybody with her set of questions, and we can pile on. And by the time we end up back in this room with kind of conversations around what we might like to shave or modify or see in a different scope, we will have had some time to have those deliberations, at least via email.
Okay.
Shannon, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Members,
Appreciate it.
work. All right, we're going in order.
Yes, sir.
All right, so we have a feasibility assessment of a new program, the Streetlight Utilities. That's going to be coming up next from Drew Raessler and Transportation Public Works.
But I have to go in there.
You got Patrick here. You want to go and vote?
And while everybody's getting set up here at the podium, we can go ahead and do a roll call and take a vote on entering executive session following our work session. So, Gene, if you want to call roll.
Davenport.
Here.
Parker. Here. Lee. Wright.
Here.
Denson.
Here.
Naismith.
Here.
Edwards.
Here.
Harrod. Thornton. Hamby. Yes.
I move we go
Commissioner
to
Neesmith?
executive session.
Got a motion from Commissioner Neesmith? Second. Second from Commissioner Parker. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? All right, so we'll enter executive session following our work session.
You ready, Mr. Mayor?
Yeah.
Okay.
Absolutely. Thanks, Drew.
All right, we will jump right in. So this presentation is, really want to emphasize the feasibility portion of the feasibility assessment of streetlight fees. Really, this was a process to determine what can be done about the increasing cost of streetlights in Athens-Clarke County. So we'll talk a little bit about problem definition and what exactly we're experiencing right now as far as cost when it comes to streetlights, as well as some opportunities that we wanted to explore on your behalf to determine what could be done that's an equitable solution to address those increasing costs. So we'll dive into the purpose, a little bit of the project overview, talk about the key considerations when considering a streetlight utility, and then recommendation and next steps. Before I move on, I do want to emphasize this process happened at the same time as the stormwater utility review. Therefore, it made sense to leverage Stantec's contract to assist us with this. This is much of what they do. However, this is entirely separate from stormwater utility fees, completely severable, and it really has nothing to do with stormwater utility other than it's just simply a utility, a customer fee-based system of funding a particular program. So tonight we'll be presenting results of that feasibility study regarding the potential for implementing a user fee system with regards to streetlights. And want to settle, before I turn it over, want to settle on this particular slide. So we would like, really this is, we want this to be a work session rather than just simply a presentation. So want to hear from you all what your thoughts are, and is there interest to continue this discussion further? If so, we've got some particular questions that we'd like you to keep in mind. If not, we do continue to have some funding challenges with streetlights that need to be addressed one way or another. So would love to hear from you all some strategies that you would like for us to explore further. So with that, I'll be turning it over to Stephen Bailey. Stephen Bailey, I believe he's presented on this once before, but he's our capital programs coordinator, a great asset to Public Works and the unified government, and he has been over the last few years charged with managing looking over a lot of our budgets, but also really managing the streetlight program. So he's got a lot of the subject matter expertise. So with that, Stephen.
Thanks, Drew. Yeah, it's one of those other duties as assigned type of things. So I'll give you a brief history of our current streetlight program. I know y'all have a lot to get through tonight, so I'm going to not go through every one of these bullet points, but I'll talk to the highlights. If you look at the bullet from 2004, that's when the most current streetlighting policy was approved. It just restates the goals for Public Works, maintain streetlights, and providing traffic safety for all modes of transportation. It also lists the minimum requirements necessary for a location when we're considering it for lighting, and I'll go over that on another slide. The next significant item I want to point out is from 2008. So during the downturn, when staff proposed a streetlight reduction, and we turned off about 1,200 lights that did not conform to our minimum lighting standards, saving about $110,000 to the general fund at that point. And then finally, last year, you all approved funding for this study on feasibility of a streetlight utility to offer solutions for budget constraints on streetlights, as well as providing lighting options outside of our current minimum standards. So this is just a visual of our current streetlights. It gives you a clear view of just how many lights we have, majority being centered around downtown, and then pockets in residential neighborhoods, with it getting sparser in rural areas. We currently maintain about 7,700 lights.
How many?
7,700.
Thank you.
So now we get into some specifics of the program as it is now. The four major funding methods for electricity and maintenance costs, which you can see there. What we're really focusing on tonight, what we're specifically interested in, are the ones that are paid out of the general fund that we lease from the 4 different utility companies here in Athens. We also talked a little bit about, capital funding for new streetlights, which currently there is no capital funding for new streetlights. But when available, those are the criteria that are used to prioritize those installations. So we look at locations specifically at intersections, horizontal and vertical curves, and dead ends. There's also a 200-foot minimum distance requirement that we have between lights that we install. And then the latest developments, as you probably know or have seen at night, Georgia Power converted all of their lights to LED in 2016. And just a comment there that while they are much more energy efficient, they've actually led to higher rates in the short term for us as Georgia Power seeks to recoup their capital cost through an inflated monthly rate for us. And we see that Walton EMC, which is a smaller portion of our lights, is rolling out something similar with a similar cost increase. So with these rising rates and changing technology, our annual expenditures have increased by more than 14% in less than 10 years.
I have a question.
Yes.
If you can go back once. So are we paying for the power to power the lights?
Yes, so we lease the lights, so we don't actually own them, but we have a controlled rate with our utility companies.
Okay.
And in fact, that's probably the biggest line item that our department has as far as our operating budget. It's about 1/4 of our annual budget.
So for how long are we going to pay?
The increased rates.
Wait, so we're leasing the light, but we're paying an increased rate for the light
Right.
and paying for the power to power the light.
So we are paying for power and maintenance as part of our controlled rate. And part of what they've tacked into that is not just the electricity cost, but the cost of replacement and maintenance of those lights. So they consider that initial capital cost part of that cost. And I don't have an answer as to when they will lower that based on when they feel they've recouped.
Back when they did that, they left the rates the same. And, they were going to save some energy, and they said, well, we need to be able to recoup our capital expense, but there was no targeted date for when they would actually recoup it and lower the cost.
I have a question. I'm a little confused because years ago, my neighborhood bought streetlights. We paid $750 each, as I recall. Mm-hmm. And Walton EMC installed them. Is this different?
So there are neighborhoods that, and were you in a private neighborhood or public?
No, public.
Okay, so at this point, most neighborhoods that are public are not paying for their own streetlights. In a private neighborhood, though, that's exactly right. They'll pay their own rates to whichever utility they're.
Well, we just bought the lights. We're not paying utilities. We're not paying. We paid for the poles to be and lights to be installed.
Sure.
But we're not paying a utility cost.
And that would be a unique situation at this point.
So that can't happen anymore? Did something change?
It's possible for private property owners to purchase security lights that can be mounted to.
No, these are streetlights.
Sure, and I call them security lights because that's what.
Cobra streetlights.
Absolutely, and oftentimes that's just how the power company refers to them. But It is possible for a group of homeowners to go in and either purchase the lights and then just fund the electricity cost, or to lease them much in the same way that we do. But in most cases, the vast majority of cases, excuse me, the streetlights that are within the right of way, usually on the utility poles, are an expense that come out of our annual.
These streetlights are in the right of way and on utility poles. Well, we don't have utility poles. We have underground services.
And we'd be glad to.
And we do not pay anything after we paid for them. So I just wonder what's.
And it may have been that Walton EMC charged you all the initial cost.
Right.
And then the annual has come into their bill to Athens-Clarke County.
That's probably the case.
But we'd be glad to look into that. Mike, did you have?
I did, just a quick one about Walton EMC. Do you know what the time frame is on them converting over to LED?
Sure. So it's actually just going to be through attrition. So as lights fall apart, they're going to replace the high pressure sodiums with the LEDs as they go. So there's not really a big rollout like we had a couple years ago.
So that could take some time then?
Could take some time, right?
Is there a way to move up? If I've had a request for some LED lights in a neighborhood I represent, that doesn't matter, does it?
Maybe if they accidentally get broken somehow, I don't know.
BB gun there. Boom.
It'll be taken care of. Thank you.
So help me understand, under streetlights are funded through one of the following, and the one I'm interested in is the University of Georgia. Tell me, how does that
Sure.
work?
So there are a number of lights on university campus that UGA pays for the maintenance of.
So that is in their campus area?
Right. Anything on their roads.
Okay.
Melissa?
Yeah, so I'm interested in whatever program through which Jerry's neighborhood paid $750, right? That's not a whole lot of money up front, and then Athens-Clarke County is paying for the ongoing costs. How could some other neighborhood get in on that program?
Sure, and I think that would be a future program that we've actually talked about, the idea of, purchasing lights instead of leasing, that kind of thing. Right now, the cost for us at least, for installing a new light or a new pole is about $1,000 for a pole. And most of the smaller utilities also charge us, if there's an existing pole, to put on a fixture is also a couple $100s. So I'm not sure, that seemed like a pretty great deal for $750.
Yeah, it wasn't hard either. I don't recall any difficulties in doing that. It seemed normal at the time.
And that's certainly something that would be great, because as you see, we don't have a capital fund to install lights, but we do have that operating fund to control the maintenance.
Well, I mean, there are neighborhoods where the streetlights aren't meeting their pedestrian lighting needs, especially neighborhoods where you have stretches where there's some vacant property.
Right.
When you have homes that have lights on every porch, there's a lot of ambient light, but I'm thinking of some of our neighborhoods where you do have stretches of vacant property or stretches of undeveloped property or creek sides or whatever. I mean, we've got a stretch on Boulevard that's really dark that people have almost ended up in the kudzu gully. So yeah, I'd like to hear more about that. If there is a way to purchase these lights up front, put them on existing poles, and then have ACC.
Manager Williams has it.
Yes, he's going to get there. The utility would allow, so right now, the mayor and commission approved policy, which Commissioner Link, you were asking about, I think at a recent meeting we had. What we're describing here would allow neighborhoods to choose their own lighting, how much they wanted, and then pay for it, And so that would be a more equitable way of deciding who gets pedestrian lighting, who doesn't. It's like if the neighborhood wants it, or they can band together and do that.
Yeah, and I would hope that in some low-income neighborhoods, we could find a way to cover those upfront costs.
I have just a real quick follow-up one about, sorry, Tim, about the policy, capital funding becomes available following the one there talks about is prioritization. Should, crosswalks be in there as well? Intersections, curves and road, and dead end, like where we have
And that would be
existing crosswalks?
Another part of the discussion, I think this original list of criteria was during a time when our goal was actually to reduce streetlights.
Yeah.
And so at this point, once there's a sustainable funding source, it really would be time to redevelop those criteria for what is a minimum standard for lighting.
Tim?
So, yeah, to go back a little bit on the questions that Commissioner Edwards was bringing up. So you said that if we were to have our own lights, it would cost us about $1,000 a pole?
To install a new pole, right?
And that would be the cost if ACC was doing it ourselves?
That's if we pay one of the utility companies to install a pole.
To install it. And then at that point, we're leasing it from the utility company, though? So we're not actually owning it?
Correct.
Okay. And what would be the cost things? I see like on the funded through one of the following, the last one is owned, operated, and maintained by ACC. What would that cost be?
Sure. So, and that's, Central Services actually has a number of lights along downtown and along Baxter, the streetscape areas where they actually own those lights. They replace the poles themselves and pay for the electricity all on their own. After talking with them, it's probably about $3,000 every time one of those gets knocked over for them to go out and replace it. Or, replacing the bulbs, I'm not sure how much that is, but it becomes their cost to do all of that.
About $3,000 in whatever they're. But those, of course, are fancier lights than what we've been
They are,
talking about.
yes,
sort
they're
of.
the lantern top lights that you'll see, sort of the bell shape.
Okay. I guess I'd be curious to see how much it would cost if we weren't leasing it and we owned and operated them ourselves, the regular basic poles that we have on other roads, especially since we're paying $1,000, we're leasing it, and then we're somehow getting added on these capital costs on top of this,
Yes.
which we don't understand when it's going to end. I guess on that, Manager Williams, how is the contract negotiated? What's the time frame for negotiating contracts with Georgia Power on that stuff?
I'd have to go back and look at the term, but at the time, it was a kind of a one-time, we're making this conversion. It was happening all over the state. That was what the offer was at the time. And, that's what was agreed to.
Okay. I think we need to have a timeline of when those rate increases are going to end. I mean, I think that's absolutely necessary. We need to know when are they recouping their costs. They have to be at some point. This shouldn't be infinite. And so we can have a better time frame. Then we can really compare the costs here of what our best options are. But I think that's an integral information for us to be having this conversation.
Jerry?
Just a footnote. My understanding is that Walton EMC's LED lights will be 3,600 Kelvin as opposed to Georgia Power's 5,000 Kelvin, which will be much better.
Okay.
Yeah, 5,000 is not, that's bad.
It's bad. All right.
Sure, yeah. I appreciate this discussion. So this is really just a snapshot of that policy that we talked about going back to 2004. And I don't have to get much into it because we already talked about the minimum standards here. But we can also provide you a copy of that if you're interested in reading all the technical jargon. It's fun reading. So this really brings us to our funding challenge, and what's a PowerPoint presentation without charts and graphs? So this is a visual here that you can see that constant funding deficit we talked about for streetlights. As utility rates continue to increase about 1% to 2% each year, while the operating budget remains relatively stagnant. Historically, we've found savings in other operating line items, specifically salary savings, but we know that's not sustainable. And especially as rates continue to climb, and with the potential of the LED conversion for Walton, even further increasing rates there. I'd also like to point out that it's not just a funding challenge that we face, but it's also a service challenge for our residents. Currently there is no dedicated streetlight staff for program management, field audits, and customer service. A number of us take on the responsibilities as we can, but we're limited in our time and expertise with lighting. Which brings us to the opportunities presented by a streetlight utility. So here I will talk through each of these bullets quickly. This has the potential to be a more equitable funding source. So no longer a blanket cost through property taxes. We could actually charge based on each person's lighting benefits, residential versus commercial, neighborhoods with streetlights versus neighborhoods without streetlights, things like that. It would also be a more sustainable funding structure. So as stated before, funding consistently lags behind actual costs, about $80,000 behind on average a year. We'd also be able to provide faster service responses with that dedicated staff. And then we'd have funding, as we talked about, for additional installations. So we've only been able to install new fixtures on existing poles, and really that's only in Georgia Power territory where they don't charge us for putting a fixture on an existing pole. Other utilities would charge us that. Other than those examples, we have no funds for any new poles, and we've created a backlog of requests that have come in that we haven't been able to install at this point. So the utility fee would include supporting a small capital fund for future installations to cover that. And then more efficient billing oversight. This is something that's greatly needed. Just as an example, when we asked Georgia Power to provide us a map of all our lights that corresponded with our itemized bill, they finally were able to provide that last year, and we found that there were maybe a dozen lights that were actually located in downtown Atlanta that we were being charged for. So this has now been fixed, but it's things like that, you know. And
Did we get a refund?
we're continuing to ask that.
Okay, I'm kind of curious if, could the streetlight utility, could we just take over the streetlights and not pay Georgia Power and not pay Walton EMC? Could we explore the possibility of just having municipal streetlights?
So we're glad to look into that. There are some particular challenges with that. So the vast majority of the lights are on the power poles. So there is a cost for that space, a rental cost for that space, and then actually acquiring the infrastructure itself. So there's the light, any support to the light, any service line to that light, and so really that infrastructure is owned by either Georgia Power, Walton EMC, or as the case may be. So,
But we lease the space for them to use. They put a pole there and then release space on their pole to us.
So so the $1,000 is for the cost to actually put out a new pole. It's just the cost of the pole. Everything else involved, so the luminaire arm, the actual fixture, replacing the fixture when it goes out, and just kind of any other routine maintenance is all funded as a true lease program. So, like I said, most of those lights are on the power poles, and when we're able to put up a new light on an existing power pole, there is no additional cost there's no capital cost. It's only the lease cost from then on out, and all those other expenses are baked into the lease. But this is something that we're looking into. We'd be glad to look at, provide you some of that information. We've got the Georgia Power does have the Public Service Commission is involved with that. Walton EMC we're talking to. As recently as within the last couple of weeks, mentioning that as a potential possibility. So we're trying to wrap our arms around what might be involved in that. And like I said, we'd be glad to share that. And again, I guess as far as the funding can be looked at. So important question, but the funding can be looked at independent of the issue of who actually owns it. It can be looked at based on what are the costs and then what's the most equitable way to recover those costs.
Yeah, I'm just not too satisfied with the current level of service from Georgia Power. I think the 5,000 Kelvin LED bulbs are wrong, and I'm troubled that they haven't refunded us money that we paid them for lights in downtown Atlanta.
Sure. So, and we're working with them. They've been they have been good to work with, particularly when an LED light goes up and there's a shielding issue. Someone that's getting a whole lot more light into their windows, and they're coming out and helping us with that. They've been responsive to our requests for mapping and in understanding the particulars of the bill and finding those inefficiencies. So we continue to have those conversations, but yes, it is important.
Avita.
So how much money are we talking about with the Atlanta pavement, and what is the problem of getting reimbursed back? How much money are we talking about? And what is the problem that we can't get a refund?
Sure, and I think that was just meant as a small example. It's maybe a dozen lights at the most over, and I'm not sure how long they've been charged that way, but it's probably less about that and more about the fact that that would have been easily caught if, with billing oversight. That's something that just wasn't caught because there was nobody looking at it.
Drew, the mic.
Oh,
Use
thank
the
you.
mic.
And the other thing that I'll mention on that, so having that billing oversight is important. And as far as looking at those issues of improper funding, so in addition to be able to catch it as it comes with some dedicated staff, there's some challenges when we do have these conversations of identifying exactly which bills that was assigned to in order to be able to have that conversation. But again, that's something that we continue to look into.
Jerry, as I recall, when Georgia Power put in the LEDs, the 5,000 degree Kelvins, as I recall, we were told they didn't ask what we wanted, they just did it. Is that accurate? Because they didn't ask me.
That would have been before both of us.
Yeah, so that's unfortunately before our time, but Georgia Power does, though, have to consider the statewide implications of the lighting fixtures that they choose. So they do with leased assets, and it's the same for Georgia Power as it is for Walton EMC. They'll be looking to standardize on something that they can use for their entire service area, rather than community specific, and that would be some of the advantage.
Well, that would be inappropriate lighting in some places, is what that results in. And it seems to me like if we're leasing the fixture, we should have something to say about what goes in it. But enough of that. The other thing is, I'm having a hard time wrapping my head around the concept that they put in new LEDs and raise the lease price. I know there's capital costs up front on that, but the operating and maintenance costs, I believe, go down significantly. So why would the lease, have they shown you the numbers to justify that? No.
No, and they are, again, the rates that we get from them are governed, the PSCs involved, so I think there's some challenge. Certainly an important discussion, but.
Okay, thank you.
All right, we've got quite a bit left in this presentation. Let's work through the rest of the presentation, then just hold your questions until the end.
The final point that I'll make here is, so we hinted at before, is the ability with a utility to increase lighting options. So as Commissioner Link mentioned there, on roads that have particularly dark stretches there, we could have enhanced lighting services per business district, per neighborhood, where they would be able to pay something above and beyond the initial utility fee to include options for increased or decreased wattage, custom fixtures, more closely spaced pedestrian lighting, that kind of thing.
I would argue just the opposite, that we need a new lighting ordinance that we obey that takes into consideration the new science of LED lights.
Jerry, let's hang on to the.
I just saying, I don't think neighborhoods or anybody else should be able to make that decision. I think that should be policy.
Note any points or questions.
Thank you, sir.
Go ahead.
Oh, that's right. That's most of what I got for the history part of it. I'm going to turn this over to Bill Zieberts.
He's ready to sit down.
It's a good time for me to duck out. Bill's going to explain some of the processes and considerations for this actual study here.
You did a good job with that.
Yeah.
So, as Drew indicated, we did a feasibility study. The feasibility study is trying to answer the very simple question of, is there enough benefit in this topic to justify going forward and making some final decisions about how you might create a streetlight charge? The whole bunch of options. You've got to screen it first and decide, is it worth talking to everybody and dealing with the data issues and trying to worry with all the complexity? And in this case, the pretty clear answer is yes, and you can get a sense of the benefits up here. There's a lot of upside, and I'll just say it does directly relate to some of the questions you're asking. You're managing the streetlight function now with very, very little staff time, and so there just isn't a lot of time for oversight. And my guy that's done this kind of thing, public power and the public utility and local government things for like 40 years, said we looked at the streetlight billing. Like, oh my gosh, this is terrible. He said, yeah, it's always like that. It never used to matter. So where does the oversight come from? Well, it doesn't really matter to them. It matters to Athens-Clarke County. And it's not something you can't manage, but it's something you can't manage without a little bit of time. So this, taking a more of a utility approach to this function, gives you the flexibility to have a little more staff time and address some of these things in a way that makes sense locally. So what are some of the things that to do a feasibility study? How could you do a charge? You need to think about who you would be charging, how you would assess the charge, how would you decide how much to charge to whom? What kind of, would this relate to the levels of service we're talking about? How much light do you want where? And then how would you literally do the billing? So in the first question, and we're going to emphasize the stuff that you would do at first. If you started a streetlight charge, the powerful thing to do is probably to start it very simply. Very simple assumptions, very simple administration, minimize the complexity so your implementation costs aren't high, you don't need a whole bunch of administrative time and all that kind of junk. Just get it in place. Once it's in place, then you've got that enhanced flexibility to respond to whatever would be coming up. So this question of how many distinctions would you make at the level of service or the type of customers? Well, we'd say to start with, let's just maybe segregate it into residential and commercial properties. Let's decide that that's a good way to start billing. How then would you assign costs on this left side of this thing? How would you then say, what would everybody be charged? Well, you could charge it the same amount per parcel, the same amount per dwelling unit, the same amount per acre, the same amount per front footage. That's a kind of a funny one these days, but that's a real traditional way that a lot of public works stuff has been funded, and it has a lot of logic to it. The more street you touch, the more relevant. How many rooftops? Like a stormwater idea. All of those have benefits and costs. Some of them are easier to manage, some of them are easier to implement, some are easier to talk about. All of that needs to come together, and I'll show you a little matrix where we try to balance it all out a little bit. The level of service concept is here. We talked quite a bit about the idea that there's this common benefit of thoroughfares, and so there's an increment of this cost that really everybody, every entity, maybe every property owner or every resident, depending upon how you bill it, but everybody should participate in that. And then there's a significant portion, I know it's a little less than half, I think, but in the neighborhood of half of your energy expense is related to neighborhoods. Well, maybe then that only goes to people who live in neighborhoods where you've got that additional benefit. Maybe they're neighborhoods who didn't want it. Now you've got it, it's a common cost to all, it's in the general fund. If you did it this way, you could charge to the people who had it or had that light or wanted it. And then this bottom box, enhanced security lighting, is a very general, that's a specific few words, but it's referencing the general idea that you could, as happens in Athens-Clarke County, give people the chance to dialogue and talk about what they want and what would be desirable for them. And you could set up, if you had this way of paying for everything, you could set it up to where if enough people wanted it and they would be willing to pay an increment on their streetlight charge, then the neighborhood could make it happen. And it'd be easier for you to make something like that happen if you had a way to pay for it. You wouldn't be bound then to go back and assess the cost to everybody, because you'd have a way. They would know, well, it's this much more per month for all of us, or this much more per year, more likely. So this study doesn't try to solve all that, but it says if you did take this route, you'd have better ability to do those kinds of things. And then finally, how would you bill it? There are lots and lots of ways that you can bill these charges. Thank you, Drew. And these kinds of charges are not uncommon. There are probably 20 or 30 in Georgia in active use now, and they're out there on the tax bill, or they're on the stormwater bill, or they're on the water and sewer bill. They're all different kinds of places. Then let's screen those out a little bit, and let's try to think about the things that would be easiest to manage. There's no need to have an army of people doing paperwork that doesn't need to be done. There's no need to do something in a way that maybe confuses the public more than they need to. There's no way you don't need to do anything in the wrong way. The two that seem to make the most sense here are evaluating the water bill and looking at the general tax bill, where you can put these non-ad valorem charges. So what did we do? We tried then to get as specific as we could in this preliminary feasibility study, build a bunch of matrices, try to quantify what we could, and then trying and having conversations to acknowledge everything that was relevant, but then focus on some of the main hurdles that these kinds of charges have. The idea of non-payment risk, it's not unheard of for a local government to start a charge and then just have people not comply. There's a lot of costs associated with that. The idea of equity. Can we do this in a way that's maybe fairer than having it on the tax bill as it is now? And that's a significant option. And then this implementation management, I've talked about several times. The idea of getting something in place, you just don't need to spend a whole lot of money that isn't necessary to be spent. So water bill and tax bill are the real focus. Focuses on billing, and this is a little small for you to see up here, but we know you've got a real full agenda, and so you can certainly get all of the background that you want. But we've got two summary matrices, and I said we had a heck of a lot behind these, but two summary matrices. This one is the water bill, and in this concept of using the water bill, the different rows there show some of the ways that we could assign the costs. So if we did it on a per parcel basis, if we did it on a unit, that's not really a dwelling unit right here, it's sort of a tax assessor unit. Front footage, acreage of parcels, trip generation has got some very cool aspects because we can tell based on all the traffic engineering stuff that, a mini mart generates a lot more traffic than a single family home. So you can associate trip generation. But all of these different kinds, these different rows, these different ways of assessing the cost then have different challenges for implementation. The same rows here, front footage, parcel, et cetera, but all now potentially being billed on the tax bill. Again, this non-ad valorem charge, this cost-based charge applied to the tax bill and showing up in that way. You see a lot more green here because administratively and from an implementation standpoint, the stars align a little bit better, so it's a little bit more powerful of a set of questions. Things line up more easily, especially as you're talking about a new charge. So to cut to the chase then, the water bill is a viable option. It's red, maybe that's a little bit more negative than it should be, but it looks harder. It looks a little more complicated, a little more confusing, a little more cross-conversing between databases that aren't really linked. But billing through the tax bill looks very powerful, very, very sensible, well aligned with property ownership, which of course is more stable than people coming into town, going to school, that kind of thing. The databases are a little bit better aligned. The alignment with the way that street lighting is being managed is a little bit more powerful. So in terms of the feasibility study, this is pretty encouraging stuff. Let's see, what did I want to tell you about here? I just wanted to emphasize, I guess, that you've got, this is about the order of magnitude. We're talking in this $1.2 million a year, the two major functions, thoroughfare and neighborhood lighting. So this is what would need to be recovered and projecting out a few years. And then the next slide, I think, there we go, gives you some annual numbers for these two functions, the two boxes, on the left the neighborhoods, on the right the thoroughfare charge. So you pick, say, the parcels, the first data column there, that $25-26 a year, and then add it if you're well, everybody would pay the neighborhood, start on the right, about $14, 13 to 14, depending upon how we would measure the units, and then add to that around $25-26 if you're in a neighborhood for an annual number of, $30 or $40, which just happens to be in the neighborhood that a heck of a lot of charges in Georgia are. There are some as high as $120 or more a year, but not many, and some lower than that. But in general, we're in that kind of sweet spot. Your costs line up fairly well with what's fairly common out there. So that's the core of the feasibility study, which gives you, I think, good courage to say if this makes sense from the standpoint of public policy, at least you can know from a management standpoint, you have the flexibility to do the studies you need to do and implement something. I think with that, we've just got a couple of more wrap-ups. Yes?
I just want to say, when the stormwater utility was created, the same thing happened, and the mayor and commission rolled back the millage rate. So to your point, we spend about $800,000 or $900,000 a year on streetlight bills, as you saw. Mm-hmm. So that would be what you might consider to the residents to be fair, to say, look, we're going to transfer this over to a fee base, and we're going to give you your tax money back.
So we've just got two more slides, so hang on to your questions. Park those for just a second. Okay.
Sure. So practically, from this point, what we want to hear from you all, we've got the key questions in here again, but in looking at these two, if we were to provide some level of a recommendation, if this is something that you would like to see more on, we would recommend starting with the neighborhood charge. It's very easily understood by the residents. Hey, I have streetlights in my neighborhood. I'm paying for the streetlights in my neighborhood. Where it can get challenging with the thoroughfare charge, would be, I live in a subdivision that doesn't have any streetlights yet. You're charging me $13, $14 a year for what? And then explaining, well, those are for the thoroughfare streetlights, the streetlights that you drive every day on College Station or Timothy Road or Epsford. So that, as far as kind of easily understood for an initial step, that might be a good way to ease into it. Next step, so we will wrap all of this into a technical memorandum and provide that to you in an agenda item. And then pending your feedback and your direction, should this be something that you would like to see us to continue on the path of, these are the items that we would look into actually setting up the actual utility. So I'll land on this particular page for questions for you. So we're glad to take questions or any comments on these.
Mike?
Sure. Thank you, Drew. And it's an interesting discussion. I'm certainly interested in hearing more. But I will say this, a lot of people think that that streetlights are there for public safety reasons, and certainly, property tax. I mean, that's one of the main things we do is to provide that public safety component to our citizens and to our community. So certainly, I think we ought to approach this with caution when we start turning it over to a fee-based solution in that regards. And I guess what I'm wondering is, I saw where one slide you had 20 pending requests for some streetlights currently. So that would be $1,000 a piece. Is that what that is? Is that? I guess why I'm asking that is maybe this is something we can consider as part of our budget this year, is to put some money in for not only these 20, but some that may develop over the year. And I'm sure there's some ongoing costs, but at least let's get something in that capital fund this year to move along with this.
I have no idea what those 20 pending requests are. I know I've made requests for 2 neighborhoods, and what I got back was a no. So I don't know if that's pending or not. And one of the reasons that was given to me is that streetlights are for traffic safety. It's not security lighting. It's not even pedestrian lighting. It's traffic safety. So now we're changing it into a whole different model to justify charging utility for streetlights. I think we're opening up a tremendous Pandora's box here. To charge somebody $1 a month for streetlights when they don't have any will make the stormwater confusion look easy. So I'm going to listen some more, but right now I think that we need to go a different direction.
Melissa?
So if we were to come up with this utility and charge fees, that means the University of Georgia and other nonprofits and the state of Georgia and all these other landholders in town would be subject to those fees?
Maybe. So
hear yes.
it depends. So this is the money slide, right? So on the left chart is what we're calling the neighborhood charge. So this is in your particular neighborhood, as we define, and some of on the edges, it's probably a little easier to define neighborhoods than some of the in-town neighborhoods. But nevertheless, if within your neighborhood streetlights are present, and it's a very binary yes or no, if the answer is yes with the streetlight utility and this particular charge, then that charge would be applied to that property. If the answer is no, particularly if we remember back to the map, and I can pull that up, I think particularly kind of in the northern, eastern, and then some of the northern western portions of the county, there are no streetlights there. They would not be charged this amount. So if that's the limit of the utility, then if you do not have streetlights, again, in your neighborhood, you would not pay that. So then, since this is only looking at the neighborhood portion of that bill or of that expense, then we would not be getting into the thoroughfare, which would be charged to the commercial and nonprofit properties. Now, if we were to move into the second table and add that on top, or look at that exclusively, the thoroughfare charge, and to charge based on either units or parcels, then that would be a charge that would be applied to every parcel in Athens-Clarke County or every unit within Athens-Clarke County.
I'd prefer a model that applies to every parcel and possibly even has a higher charge for vacant parcels. I'm not necessarily undeveloped, but vacant parcels, because I feel like that's where we do have our challenges when it comes to pedestrian lighting. When we have parcels that are left vacant and there's no ambient lighting coming from the actual lighting of the property, I feel like it can really drag a whole neighborhood down.
Allison?
Yeah, I guess our next step is to do a little bit more study, and if you were to come back with details or moving forward, and when that happens, can you give us some clear definitions of what's a security light, what's a street light, what's the sidewalk light? Because, yeah, I think those are, would that cover the three categories? Vehicle lighting is going to be the street lighting, and then pedestrian might be the sidewalk lighting.
Sure.
And whether they can be both, that kind of thing, because I think that's going to help us understand the different places as well as the different types.
Sure. And we'd be glad to.
Okay.
From a funding standpoint, when we look at pedestrian lighting, the challenge is not so much particularly pedestrian lighting. The challenge is not so much the capital cost, because we can justify that as part of a sidewalk project. The challenge comes in that we're already year over year about $80,000 over budget in our streetlight leasing expense. And as currently structured, without dedicated staff to really wrap their arms around that bill on a weekly basis from Walton EMC, Georgia Power, we're not able to, one, manage and provide that level of oversight that Bill was talking about, and two, really be able to get into those negotiations, discussions on a deeper routine level with our utility providers. But we'd be glad if I guess kind of similar to Blaine's suggestion, any questions that y'all want to make sure that we address in the technical memorandum, which will be the next time that you all see this as this is what was done to memorialize this particular process, we'd be glad to include those in that.
I think that would be helpful. And then if we have advanced to where some of the lighting could be motion activated, if that's a current trend, because it seems like that would be helpful for safety purposes, and if that is maybe just the sidewalk ones versus anyway, if that's part of some of the new trends, I think that we should learn about that too.
Sure. And that would be more in a position of ownership than of lease. We'd be glad to address this in the technical memorandum, but just from the standpoint of that's not something Georgia Power would put up on their own. It's not something that they have in their inventory. And then we would want to look and see the experience. I think that technology exists. The effectiveness of it over time would be interesting for us to take a look at.
But because I know that when we've had our meetings with the Student Government Association for the last 4 years, they have one of their things is we're trying to use the bus, and then we're trying to feel safe walking from the bus stop into the neighborhoods where we live, and that's where I learned the difference of the street light being for vehicles and yet what we think of as a pedestrian lighting safety.
Sure.
So.
And Stephen mentioned it earlier. That's because of these challenges. The policy as it's written today, that TE01 is really targeted at the traffic safety, and that's why why the 20 backlog is not 100 backlog is because the policy is so narrowly written to avoid putting out a whole lot more streetlights, further exacerbating the annual operating expense. And so then it is targeted at those very high risk situations, but there are a lot of other good places that streetlights could go.
And so when you're coming forward again, would you be having an updated policy recommendation since this one's so seemed outdated?
That's not the plan,
Okay.
but we'd be happy to help with that discussion.
Okay.
Tim?
Thank you.
Yeah, so I'm definitely intrigued by this, and I think it's when we're talking about it. I know some of the commissioners are talking about this is like adding on money. I mean, in theory, especially if we're to reduce the millage rate, this is not adding additional cost to taxpayers. This would be keeping it the same for them. So I think, and I do think we need to be careful with the way we talk about it so that we don't end up in situations where there was so much confusion around the stormwater situation like there was. But in some ways, this could be more transparent for a person's bill because it gives a more line item. Like you understand how much of your taxes, because they're already paying for this, because it's buried in their tax bill. I mean, if they're already paying for this, they don't understand exactly how much they are paying for it. But like when it comes to that transparency and that understanding and some of the problems that I think we had with stormwater, definitely some of the terminology needs to be here, like calling it thoroughfare. I think most people are going to be completely confused by what that means. If we had some kind of terminology that was more of, community lighting or something like that, that brought about the idea of like, oh, I get it. This is for the entire county because everywhere else has lights. Call it thoroughfare. I guarantee we're going to have a lot of people pissed off saying, I don't have a thoroughfare. I don't live on a thoroughfare. Sure. So I think that's one of the things that we should look at. And I wonder, speaking to Commissioner Link, I understand the appeal of going to a parcel billing, but then we do lose that equitable billing function that y'all kind of came up here. I mean, that's where we see some of the worst ratings there is it's a little more difficult. So I wonder if there's a matrix we could come up with that had a baseline on parcels, but then somehow had an extra layer that we could put in place that was based on trip generation or something like that to make it a little more equitable there. And the last thing I just want to bring up is touching on one of our other subjects tonight, which is for renewable energy. And one of the biggest things for us to get to that goal that we're setting for ourselves is to limit consumption. I'm a little concerned about that, about creating a system here that makes it where we can actually increase the number of lights throughout the county, therefore increasing the amount of energy that we're actually spending, while at the same exact time this evening we're talking about how we have to drastically cut back. So I think if we were to go this direction, I think we would need a new policy, and a policy that actually had some limitations to how many we're going to be allowing to be put up in our community.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Andy?
I mean, I don't have anything particularly profound to say, but which is perhaps no different from usual. But I don't know whether the technology is reliable or not, but the notion of kind of motion-detected lighting is kind of intriguing. Certainly, when I walk through the frozen aisle section in Publix, the lights come on in the machine on the display cabinets, and that might be a way of saving some electricity, plus allowing us to be able to actually look at the night sky once in a while. But the broader issue I wanted to just touch on is that if this is operated like a utility, then everybody pays. That's how the stormwater works, as opposed to, as you well know, when it's paid out of property taxes, it's only people that are on the tax rolls that pay it. But the comment I was really going to have was, according to this slide, talking about putting if we were to go in this direction, putting the fee on the tax bill, I would suggest you have a long conversation with the tax commissioner and the attorney about that, because I'm not sure that you're allowed to do that, to put non-property taxes on the property tax bill. And even if you are at the moment, there's always a bill in the legislature that's trying to stop us from doing that. So it's going to have to, it might be able to go in the same envelope, and I don't know what the law currently is on that, but I don't think it can go on the same bill as your property tax bill.
Thank you. I just wanted to express some support for the recommended option. I actually think that having, if possible, the cost be footed by the owners rather than the tenants makes sense to me, given that, and we live in a town where 50% of folks are rent burdened. People who have excess capital to spend on making their property that they're renting out nice makes a lot of sense to me. But that's all. I'm really glad that you all brought this to our attention because I thought it was really interesting.
Thank you.
Mike?
Sure, I'll just be real brief too, but, again, I just think we ought to proceed with caution with this. I hope you are, because, we didn't hear a clear answer about, and I know you don't have a clear answer about whether some of the nonprofits that I know some of you are speaking of would want to include in a fee-based system. It'd be nice if we could just charge the nonprofits a fee-based system and leave everything else the way it is. But I know that's not possible. But we don't even know if the University of Georgia was thrown out there that they would be inclined to be part of this program or be made to be part of this program. Either way, I think there's some answers there to be answered. But I will say this, when we have up here the annual savings to the general fund, I mean, we're really not adding more streetlights. I mean, the call is for this time to add 20 requests are out there. So this doesn't get us additional streetlights. This just gets us savings or not savings, just moving how you pay for it around, really. So it's not meeting some of the concerns, like I know the two concerns Jerry had, and I've had some as well. So those are some issues that perhaps we can address in the capital budget this year. And I was going to make another point, and I'm drawing a blank on what I was going to make, but I just
I'm sure it was profound.
It was very profound. I was saving it for the last point. I can't quite remember what it is right now, but I guess just proceeding with a little bit of caution on this is perhaps the way to.
And I'm sorry, just a real quick comment on that, because we completely agree. We did some comparison throughout the state of other places that have established streetlight utilities. And the typical process has been, over time, HOAs, or a developer comes in, builds a subdivision, the roads within it, puts the streetlights in, and then the HOA takes over the cost of that leased asset. And then eventually the municipality comes in and then takes it over for the HOA. This is a different process, in that it's not a one-to-one swap from the HOA paying for it to the utility paying for it. It's the general fund paying for it to the utility paying for it. So it is different. We absolutely agree that doing it carefully is critical to success.
I've remembered what it was I was going to say, if I can, Kelly. So, when you're driving late at night or early in the mornings, as some of us do, you notice there's an awful lot of street lighting in some of the major thoroughfares. I mean, it almost seems like it's too much. I mean, have you ever thought about just like scaling back on some of the thoroughfares and trying to meet demand in some of the neighborhood streets that want it? I mean, kind of shifting the lights around to where you spread them out a little bit more, instead of adding additional lights and additional cost and all that sort of stuff.
Sure. The only experience I know the department has in that is, and it's referenced in the history item during some of the budget cut years, streetlights, the policy was applied to existing streetlights, because much of the existing streetlights were just grandfathered in from years ago. And so then there was discussion of which lights should we turn out, what's a systematic way that we can go about finding those, identifying them, and turning them off to save money.
Yeah, that was a good discussion that we had. Or I wasn't on the board then, but.
You have much more context than I do.
Kelly and Andy lost a lot of hair over that discussion.
Yes, we did.
Right.
Thank you. I was curious about question number 4 about enhanced lighting in dedicated districts. What had you imagined in terms of dedicated districts? Like, I'm sure everyone has that street in their district where they love streetlights, but I, for example, was wondering if there might be a way we could work with the police department to identify areas with high levels of violent or property crime. I get a lot of requests from folks who have repeated break-ins and want a streetlight just to feel better about where they live. But I don't know if there is actually a mechanism by which we could go about, or if it would be effective to define districts in that way.
That particular scenario is probably best handled on a policy level. Yeah. And being able to identify or quantify exactly what those situations are where additional streetlights are needed for public safety. What we're referencing here when we talk about dedicated districts would be, and the example I use is, I know Baxter Street has a lot of pedestrian lighting now. Let's say, for example, Normaltown on Prince Avenue wanted to have a lot more, have that pedestrian street light, that aesthetic of those decorative lights, much of like what we have downtown, to expand that to that kind of in-town area. This would be a method where that's currently outside of our policy. We'd have to create some mechanism there. But then they would be able to come out, install those streetlights. We could install those streetlights, whoever funds the capital, and then that annual operating for that enhanced service to that area the businesses would take over that cost. And this is a model that's taken place with some CIDs, some community improvement districts, business districts that are interested in having that pedestrian scale lighting, that they've said, look, we'll pay for it. We just need some administrative help to get it off the ground, get it going, and get it established. And so this would be when we talk about dedicated districts, that's really more the model that we were referencing. But if there was a particular neighborhood that was interested in enhanced lighting, anything above and beyond whatever the policy is, then this would provide a conduit whereby they could pay for that enhanced service.
Gotcha.
Melissa?
Yeah, I'd be interested in seeing some numbers for what the annual operating costs are for the streetlights in public streets that go through the University of Georgia, that are, specifically inter-campus streets, as well as stoplight operating costs, and even pavement maintenance, those kind of costs, because I feel like, there are streetlights throughout campus that are primarily serving University of Georgia purposes, and honestly, there isn't a lot of traffic through campus at night. It pretty much shuts down in the early evenings. So, I feel like we're paying for lighting that isn't necessarily utilized by the general public.
Sure. We'd be glad to provide a map that kind of shows the division of service. Most of the lights most of the streets internal to campus are university owned, so they do handle their own resurfacing. While we provide the signal maintenance, they do pay. We've got an agreement that is approved by this body to fund that over. I think it's a 3-year recurring contract that comes up, and they pay into the general fund to fund our maintenance of their signal assets. And they have agreements with the various power, mostly Georgia Power, I believe. So, but we'd be glad to share kind of where those limits.
Yeah, I'm interested, what we're paying for and what
Sure.
they're.
Drew, I guess before we close, I'll just say I would express some level of caution, particularly in terms of how the mechanics might work. I want to make this as absolutely seamless as possible, with our cautionary tale of stormwater management having been a little bit challenging. Avita, did you have?
I did, but I'm going to pass because I think I'm getting ready to leave.
Okay.
I got
Andy.
a question. Drew, do you, or I see our attorney sitting out there, do we know if a streetlight utility like this has been challenged in court and upheld, its constitutionality upheld?
Bill, do you have any?
I don't know if it's challenged.
In Georgia, I mean.
No,
I can't challenge
you. They don't have the same legal issues that the stormwater utility does. It's much more direct, measurable. So it's not as suspect as challengeable as the stormwater utility does. But even that is successful.
Yeah. It's slightly more intuitive for the users than stormwater.
Drew, thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
So moving from the mechanism for funding some power to some means of saving some power and modifying our consumption habits and sources of that power. Andrew Saunders from Sustainability is getting set up now.
Okay, yeah, it'll come up.
Sorry. You're looking good. Didn't deliver them properly to the presiding officer of the Senate. Because it was before he was sworn.
Andrew, thank you for coming and joining us tonight.
Now that we've got you all excited about our energy use, I'm going to talk about the rest of it. So I'm here tonight to talk to you a little bit about our clean energy goals that are being presented to you. What we're going to do is we're going to talk about the history and what's already happened within the community as it relates to renewable energy, talk about the specific resolution that will be coming before you for a vote, and discuss what those next steps look like. And to achieve these three things, we'll go through this outline, which is just going to kind of take you from the very beginning of the idea into an implementation phase. One thing that's important to recognize is that we actually already have clean energy goals. They're maybe just not the best ones. So in 2016, this body took up a resolution to adopt goals for both the organization and the community. What you'll notice is that they lack a specific number or target, and therefore, when we say increasing, are we increasing to 17% or 200%? Not really sure. When we went through the Envision Athens process, which later fed into the comprehensive plan, there is a specific action item in their agenda related to energy, and it has to do with decarbonizing the energy supply. And then, of course, last February, Mayor Gertz signed on with the Sierra Club's Mayor's Initiative for 100% clean energy. This body adopted their FY20 strategic commitments that included a direction to set clean energy goals and begin that planning process. And so following those adoptions, we started to work with some of the advocates and partners within the community to discuss, well, what would a resolution look like? Specifically, what was important to our office was that it reflect the values of our community and maybe not follow just a strategic boilerplate that's been passed around the nation. Why 100%? Well, as always, I'm going to give you the three major reasons and a triple bottom line. But first and foremost, this community is sending an awful lot of dollars out of the community for energy. Now, when we adopt renewable energy goals, does that stop? No. But it gives us an opportunity to retain that workforce and perhaps even that production to be closer to home and to certainly not be leaving the state and the country. We also see that Georgia has been a very strong state for energy growth, energy jobs, and that has to do with the growth of solar and the popularity within the state. Environmental, a significant portion of our greenhouse gases are currently associated with the energy and transportation sectors. And so as we decarbonize those, we can start to clean up our environmental impact. And then one of the things that is touched on a little bit in your agenda item is energy burdens and the idea that there are households in this community that pay a significant portion of their income as it relates to energy. And so there are people that are constantly facing the idea of, do I pay for heat this month or do I pay for rent and food? And that's a difficult decision to make. What is renewable energy? Specifically, this will be reviewed in an upcoming plan, but for the purposes of the conversation tonight, it's anything that's naturally replenishing, and this comes from the Department of Energy's definition. So you can see some examples up there, and then a couple of in-county examples or near-county examples of renewable energy. And so while solar is becoming the most cost competitive and is certainly the technology that we're utilizing quite a bit, we envision that all of these would be important to getting us to those goals. The resolution that's put before you really has three areas of emphasis. The first is related to our organization. So for our organization, it proposes 100% renewable by 2035 with a decreasing use of renewable energy certificates, or RECs, if you will, through 2050. Just in case, it's covered in the agenda item, but a renewable energy certificate is essentially a exchange-traded equivalent of renewable energy. So just as you might see ozone gas being traded or any kind of pollution credits, what it reflects is the production of 1 megawatt hour of renewable energy, and it is a way for us to drive incentives into the local and national markets to support renewable energy generation. But what I suspect we will find as we enter the planning phase is that those are a useful tool, and we'll talk about that a little bit more in a minute, but really the more we can do locally and regionally, the better it would be for us and our economy. It also sets a community goal. The community goal says 100% of electricity being from renewable sources by 2035, with all other energy sources by 2050, and a specific emphasis on working with marginalized communities and folks that have barriers to access. And then there's a direction for planning. So one of the things I really want to hammer home is we are doing a lot with renewables and with solar, but if you adopt this goal, it's not a solar panel for every building first. Step one is to use as little of the resources as economically possible, and then you start to offset the use of that resource with renewables. And last and not least is you offset the portions that you can't displace with renewables with the equivalence of like a renewable energy certificate. Examples of a type of energy that you would have to offset instead of replace in today's environment would be airplane and jet fuels. There's just not a strong renewable option, and so in those cases you might be purchasing or supporting some kind of offset instead of saying, well, we're not going to fly airplanes. If we look at the Georgia grid, you can see some interesting trends. So over the past 11 years, we have seen coal decrease significantly. And while I would like to tell you that this is strictly an environmental reason, the reality is it's economics. Coal is no longer cost competitive in the grid, and so it's used sparingly. Meanwhile, we have seen natural gas come on aggressively through the use of fracking, and we've seen solar and biomass grow substantially. So today, the average kilowatt hour that you might get from your outlet anywhere in the state is approximately 9% produced from renewable energy. When we look at what is Athens-Clarke County doing, well, we really have to look at two things. Where is the energy we're consuming, and then what are we producing that's not captured in that consumption? So what you'll see is that our energy is predominantly from electricity, natural gas, street lighting, and transportation fuels. And right now we have some offsetting equivalents. Most notably, the landfill gas plant is a substantial contributor. And then the grid contribution, the new Cedar Creek solar array that just came online last month. So in today's energy climate, we're approximately 15% renewable as an organization. The reality is that we can grow that right side, and we will, but it's much more cost effective to decrease the left side first. And so that's something that you've seen happening through our staff with SPLOST 2011 funding, and a path that we'll continue to pursue. When we talk about what's happened already, we have had some conservation efforts. I want to give a shout out to Essential Services. They've got some amazing staff as it relates to electricians and HVAC technicians. Even these lights in here have been retrofitted to LED. So we've done about 70% of the T8, so kind of these 2x4 panels or the 2x2 panels that you see in most of our buildings, and we continue to work on those. We've also done HVAC upgrades as funding is present, and our office is currently looking at, well, how might we layer in SPLOST funding to get a slightly more efficient system put in at the time that we're naturally going to be replacing that system anyhow. We've done a few facility-wide efforts, but that's certainly a place where we need to be more aggressive. Our office can tell you the energy use per square foot of any main building in our portfolio. And so when we know what those inefficient buildings are, then we can start to look at energy audits and coming up with a more comprehensive suite of retrofits that are needed. On fleet, we've had substantial fuel savings with the hybrid buses, but we've also really ramped up the use of hybrid cars. Now, what you're not hearing me say yet is electric cars. And I say this as somebody who drove an electric car for 3 years. I love them. Under current county policy, we have some barriers on why we're not doing that. Most notably, our average fleet administrative vehicle is going to be held for 15 years. And in today's environment, I can't guarantee you that we can have those batteries last reliably and for our function for 15 years. Although our office is working with Georgia Power to analyze some fleet replacements and see, okay, where is there going to be some balance? And then, of course, we can revisit those replacements, but that requires a more substantive review. So we've added 12 hybrids in the last 18 months. And one thing I want to compliment our staff on is our office works with fleet management to look at planned replacements. And again, we're taking SPLOST dollars and adding them on top of existing replacements to fund that. And every department that we've approached and said, we think that this vehicle might be a candidate for an equivalent hybrid, we haven't had a no yet. They've been really receptive to it, and we've gotten good feedback from those vehicles in the field. So combined, you're seeing about $100,000 in savings. If we look at solar, you'll see the unified government's deployments on the right. So the number of facilities that have some kind of solar, and then the total height of the graph is the kilowatts of production. So right now, because Cedar Creek came online, we're just over 700 kilowatts of production. We're due to bring 2 more sites online with Fire Station 2 and Cooperative Extension. And in fact, we also will have, well, actually, Rock Springs Community Center will happen in this calendar year, so that's already on the 2019 line. We have worked with our planning staff to streamline permitting, and we've been recognized for our friendliness in that regards. And then UGA and Georgia Power partnered to do a megawatt example demonstration project off of Millage Avenue. But as I mentioned, solar is not the only renewable energy that we're deploying. We've been able to use ground source heat pumps, or geothermal, if you will, at 3 different locations. What's interesting is because that's embedded in, those locations have some of our lowest energy usage per square foot of any of our buildings. So we find that, lo and behold, it does make for a more efficient building. We have solar thermal at corrections. The jury's out on solar thermal right now because natural gas got so cheap so quickly. In general, it's my belief that traditional photovoltaics or solar PV is more cost competitive, but I continue to have solar thermal guys argue that I'm wrong and just need to look at a different technology, which we certainly are open to. And then, as mentioned, we have the landfill gas plant that is taking methane that's decaying from that landfill, burning it, creating energy by spinning a generator. And one nice thing is when you can burn that methane, you take something that is a very potent greenhouse gas, methane, and convert it to CO2, thereby reducing its greenhouse damaging potential or its ozone or atmosphere damaging potential by about 17-fold. So I believe that your budget has a proposed allocation for planning that our office was already engaged with some staff and consultants on. And our approach to this is going to be very much kind of in line with what you've seen today, which is take a more in-depth dive of our energy landscape. We really need to understand what are the utilities projected to bring online, what opportunities for conservation exist, what new technologies are showing viability, and then build a plan around that. We'll need some big picture input from you all as it relates to things like what do we prioritize first within the community? Are we going to, as a government, remove barriers for say public housing, or are we going to take a more business-oriented approach? Are we going to do a blend of both? And then also, to what role, when would we activate the use of renewable energy certificates and in what manner? And I will caution you, we will work on this plan and we will be engaged with the community all the time, but this is a very dynamic market. What was a fact 5 years ago is completely different today. And one of the most common questions I get is like, well, is solar even affordable? I bid it out and it was too expensive. And then they tell me it was 5 years ago. And the reality is it's about 80% cheaper today than it was 5 years ago. So it's not an apples to apples comparison. So what we intend to see out of this plan as well is if you all accept the recommendations of the SPLOST 2020 referendum that are related to energy, and it's passed by our voters, then we would use this plan to prioritize how those funds might be used to increase the use of renewables within the community. All of this aligns greatly with a significant number of plans, and I'm going to do you a favor and not read every one of these, but it's Envision Athens, the comp plan, your strategic plans, the public utility service delivery plan, the sustainability plan. These all speak to the need for energy conservation, supporting energy-burdened communities, and increasing the use of renewable energy. And so what we're really doing is kind of bringing this under one umbrella, under one vision. Next steps, so if you all choose to adopt that resolution next week and then continue to offer up plan funding, then we will begin to initiate that planning starting in July. Anticipate that planning taking between 14 and 16 months. Got a little buffer in there. And one of the things that I've already asked our partners that we're working with to price out is I want a per engagement price for public engagement so that I can see how much we can scale that within our budget and really make sure that we're reaching out into this community and addressing our institutional partners and our business community and our low-income communities and folks that traditionally haven't been asked, how is energy affecting your life? And so to the degree that we can afford it, we'll put more and more of that public input in there. While we're doing that planning, we're not going to abandon our conservation efforts, so we're going to continue to execute lighting and work on vehicles, but we've also got a few other things in the hopper. So we'll predominantly be doing that with SPLOST 2011 funding. there's still enough of that to go to sustain these efforts while we see if SPLOST 2020 is renewed. And we'll bring that plan before you, and assuming that all of these things come together and SPLOST 2020 is approved with some level of support, then we'll start some large-scale implementation. Questions?
Melissa? Yeah, so I have a couple questions. I know, we've got a lot of folks in the community who are energy burdened, who have a hard time paying those power bills. But I also understand that there are challenges to installing solar on multifamily communities, like dividing it up. Do you know any communities where that's done? Or where you're able to pass those savings on to the low-income folks in those communities so their bills go down? Because we have lots of rooftops when it comes to like public housing and large apartment complexes, and we have this affordable housing SPLOST project we're looking at, and I would hope that we could fold this kind of effort into that.
Yes, and the challenge is every single project is different. It depends on how the power is delivered to the building, how the building performs, and who pays for that power. But we're already exploring some ideas of how we might be able to take privately funded renewables, put it on a public housing building, and even though that's going to be at the same cost as the energy coming out of the grid, it would decrease the cost of energy coming out of the grid, the remaining energy, because they could get time of use benefit and therefore benefit those people. There's also some ideas of how we might take a bunch of small meters and bring them together under one large meter, therefore being able to take advantage of economies of scale. So the answer is yes, it can be done and it will be done. It's just different every single time.
Okay. But is it easier with a brand new project where you build it in on the front end?
Yes and no. So our new buildings are inherently more energy efficient, which makes them a better target. That's why you saw our office work with the SPLOST office to recommend it for the 2 ACC buildings that are under construction. But it's not, there's other factors at play.
Okay. And my second question has to do with SPLOST and this project that's on the 2020 list in this specific bucket for renewable energy. I'm also curious if, when we do have other SPLOST projects, if those renewable energy or efficiency goals can be built into those individual project budgets rather than pulling all from the renewable energy bucket. I guess I'm just throwing that out there to everybody as we.
It's my recommendation that you don't.
So it's your recommendation that we pull renewable energy efforts for any SPLOST project out of the renewable energy bucket?
We're certainly not going to stop them, but there's two things to consider. The first is that even through this preliminary SPLOST process, you have seen multiple projects submit alternate proposals, which means they've already compromised on their ideal outcome. And in my experience, you're going to tend to find more aggressive energy conservation and renewable energy deployment to be more on the nice to have if you were to ask your average building occupant than the must have. The second is you're proposed to have a SPLOST over 10 years. And so whatever buildings are not prioritized early are going to be subject to some inflationary pressures from construction. So even though the renewable energy might become increasingly cheaper, the overall cost of the building can become a barrier. And we saw that with cooperative extension. So I believe by having it allocated into a designated source, that allows you to be more closely in touch with deploying that.
Patrick?
Yeah, just a simple question about the fleet vehicles. What is the life cycles for the batteries, and how much do they cost to replace?
It depends. So what the warranty on the batteries are usually, depending on manufacturer, 60 to 70% of life at year 10. And nobody talks about what happens after at year 10. It's not a linear drop-off. So you actually see the greatest drop-off in performance in year 1, and then it curves out and tapers off. But even, let's say 70% if some of the generation vehicles that are around now are 70 or 80 miles. So that might work for some administrative functions right now, but if we get to year 15 and they're more in the 40 to 50 mile range, we run into a scenario where staff might be bumping up against the function of that vehicle. I am very eager to do more battery electrics, but I really am kind of waiting on the market to mature before I can really aggressively recommend that to you all.
Tim?
Yeah, thank you. So, this is a big question I have. And I read an earlier version of the resolutions. I haven't seen what might be possibly there now. But I would like to see us also addressing in there divesting from any investments that the county has, including in the pension from fossil fuels. So that when we're talking about doing this, we're not also somehow actually investing in the same technologies that we're talking about trying to do.
It's your resolution.
Right.
You can do with it what you
Right.
want. What I would, I just would ask you to take into account the fact that some of the biggest investors in renewable technology right now are the fossil fuel companies that see the writing on the wall. And so I know that's not a popular idea. I know it's not.
Yeah.
But, I mean, Shell has put millions and millions and millions of dollars down because they've seen, and BP the same way. So,
But of what percentage is it actually going? I mean,
well, then that's something you might want to consider if that's a measure that you all
and
pursue.
there's an argument to be made that one of the reasons they're seeing the writing on the wall is because we actually see a lot of entities, including county governments and city governments, divesting from, yeah.
Oh, yeah. The economics have spoken.
Right.
Andy?
Thanks. I'm really looking forward to implementing what you presented here. I think we have to do it for all sorts of different reasons. I just had two quick comments. One on the issue of electric cars. I think people automatically assume that electric cars are, by definition good for the environment, but only to the extent that the electricity to power them is not generated by fossil fuels. So if it's generated by renewable energy, great. If you've got electric cars where the electricity is being generated by a coal-fired power plant, maybe not so much. So just kind of something to think about. The other thing I was going to say, though, is I was recently up in East Lansing, and one of the things that they've done up there is some of the big parking lots on the campus have each slot where a car parks, there is a canopy over the top with a cell on it, and they're generating quite significant amounts of energy. And I would just, if you're not familiar with that, I would just really encourage to maybe give their campus planner or whoever did it a call, because I'd like to see us do some of that kind of stuff on the publicly owned properties that we have control over, so our parking lots here in the county. Again, I have no idea what the cost of that is, but I think it's something worth exploring. They managed to do it, and it seems to be generating a lot of electricity.
Okay.
I just got one off-the-wall question. What are your thoughts or the feasibility of turning the biomass at the landfill into reusable energy? Like the cost, feasibility?
Do you mean like the organics, like the new material, or the existing buried stuff?
Both.
Okay, so the existing buried stuff, about 3/4 of it is the gas is being harvested and is being turned into energy. And last time I looked, I think we had about a 20-year contract on that, so we're not changing anything up there. When you look at, or kind of the digester model, where you can take organic waste and basically pre-break it down, harvest that methane and burn it, there are examples of communities that are doing that. It's always going to be a matter of scale and flow. So if you're moving a lot of plastic and inert material through there, you end up kind of having a wash, and it's not so great. If you're moving a lot of food waste, organics through there, then it can be very productive. It's certainly something that we'll look at in partnership with solid waste. The last time I looked at a unit that was in government production, it was about $90 million to construct it.
Just wanted to ask.
Yeah.
On that, 'cause, it's exciting to hear like, the methane, burning generator we have at the landfill. Has it been looked into about putting those in some of the water treatment plants where we have over the aerating tanks?
I believe that Public Utilities has done some preliminary assessments and continues to look at it.
Okay.
The closest one I know of is the city of Atlanta has an anaerobic digester built into their treatment. A little bit of a cautionary tale. When I went and toured it, they were not big fans, but my takeaway was they mixed equipment from different manufacturers, and it just wasn't a good fit, so it hasn't produced as it should. So you got to be careful when you get into that, but the concept is viable.
Andrew, thanks a bunch. We look forward to gathering together for the resolution in just a couple weeks.
Thank you.
Does everybody want to take a break for a couple minutes? All right, we're going to do 5 minutes.
Oxtail bone?
couple seconds, we'll. We are fortunate to have with us Mike Mathews tonight, who is our airport director, who is going to give us an update on the strategic plan for the Athens-Benneps Airport. So, Mike,
Thank you, Mayor Dirks. Thank you
Take it
very
away.
much. I'll breeze through this pretty quickly. One of the things that I was tasked with when I came on board was to manage the development of a strategic plan. So what I want to do is I want to provide the strategic plan to you. I want to review some of the components of it, and then I want to show you some next steps. Back in September of 2018, we did a SWOT analysis. We really started this process back in August, and we finally had our first workshop in September. We did our SWOT in December. We had another workshop with our visions, priorities, and then strategic commitments. And then our goal workshop was in February of this year, where we went over the long-term goals. And then April and May, we're doing the implementation process of initiatives, approved the plan, and then published the plan. Some of the participants, of course, were the Airport Authority, the staff. Catherine Bennett did a wonderful job. She helped us with the SWOT workshop, the vision workshop, and the goals workshop. And then Amanda Hill with May's Hour. She's the airport consultant, and she published the plan and helped us kind of put it in a nice and pretty form. And that's what's in front of you today. I won't go over the SWOT one by one, but I will tell you that we are a Part 139 airport, one of 9, and that is a tremendous strength. We also have the Department of Defense fuel contract, and our operations are financially sustainable, which I'll talk a little bit about later. Our weaknesses, lack of commercial service is one of the big ones. Opportunities, we have workforce available, and internships, strength of relationships with public and local partners. And then our threats is the airline industry itself, but we're overcoming that. So these are our missions and values. We spent probably 2 hours on each one of these. So these are pretty important to us. We want to promote a safe, consistent, efficient aviation environment. We want to provide quality aviation and then serve as a catalyst to Athens-Clarke County. The values, of course, safety and security is number 1. Financial self-sufficiency. We want to focus on the customers and the employees, and then Athens pride. Here's our vision. We spent a good bit of time on this as well. And I will read this if you don't mind. We envision being the regional airport for Northeast Georgia, driving economic development while comfortably connecting Athens to the world. This was crafted by the authority and the staff. We're very, very proud of this one. So here are the 5 strategic priorities that we had come up with. I won't go into these because I'm going to go into them a little bit further into detail. So the first one, develop a comprehensive development plan. We want to do an airport layout plan by December 2020. We always do an airport capital improvement plan each year, and then we want to evaluate our master plan as well, 2024. Number 2, establish scheduled, increased non-scheduled passenger service. So we want to recruit and establish sustainable scheduled air service, and I'll talk about that a little bit further down the line. And then increase the non-scheduled enplanements by 50%. And number 3, we want to expand the general aviation experience, and that's through our facilities and products and services, and then increase annual operations to 50,000 by 2023. Right now we have about close to 35, almost 40,000 operations. And then inform and connect community, businesses, and customers. And I won't go through all those, but this is quite aggressive, and I think we can do it.
Mike, you might just briefly define general aviation for those who aren't pilots?
Well, general aviation is basically the charter operations. It's the single engine. It's the it's the flight schools. It's anything other than commercial service is considered general aviation. So it's a big part of what we do right now. It is our bread and butter. Of course, the corporate jets, that's where we make most of our revenue. It comes from jet fuel sales. And then also ramp fees. So we make a good bit of revenue off of that. And then lastly, achieve and maintain financial self-sufficiency, which I'll touch a little bit on that as well. So our next steps. Want to develop and follow through the action plan, of course. Develop action plan steps for the strategic priorities. Work toward the targeted dates. And then continue to develop enhanced priorities. Now, continue air service development. Where we are right now is the SCASDEP grant came out this last week. And so we are...
What's that grant, Mike?
Pardon me?
What is that?
Oh, that's the Small Community Air Service Development Program. Thank you. So that came out last week, and we have 60 days to put our application in and get it to DOT. So we're going to have to work fast on that. We've got a working group that we're working with, business leaders in the community. We've already met with them once, and we kind of gave them an idea of what to expect when this grant did come out. And so now that it has come out, we're going to try to have to put it on a fast burner, I guess. Get some letters out, which I've already got to the mayor. He's got some letters to the governor, and then the state and the Fed, and then also local community, which our authority will do that as well. So we're well on our way. We've been we're excited about that. We really feel good that where we are right now in air service development, we're at a good point, and to move forward.
So this will provide us money for what?
Pardon me?
What will this money be used for?
We're going to ask for about $750,000, and what this money will be used for is the incentive plan that we have currently that the commission had approved several months back. Also marketing, and then also we'll be looking for in-kind from different community leaders, and that's one of the things that we'll try to find and try to gather within this 60-day period. But yeah, so we will also the incentive plan. Let me just go over that again. The incentive plan was so we're going to give them free rent for a year. It was free landing fees, and then help them to build their infrastructure. I think when they first come on board, such as telephones, internet, that kind of thing. And then continue to enhance airport revenues to maximize the potential growth of the airport. One thing I wanted to mention was, I think last year we had to dip into the general fund by about $40,000, I believe, and that's what's on our financials. But one thing that's not on our financials is the property taxes generated from aircraft that's based on the airport. And I made a call to the tax assessor, and that comes to about $268,000. And so if you take that plus the $40,000 we dipped into, we're still in a good shape. Let's see. And then developing.
When you said the property taxes, you mean the ad valorem tax?
Yes, ad valorem tax for the aircraft that's based on the airport. And that's it. Pretty quick. Any questions?
Have y'all, I know there's talk about attracting some type of carrier like what we've had before. I'm thinking a large commercial entity. But what efforts might be made to go after a small carrier that operates shuttle flights in other areas of the country that might look at this space and say, oh, well, maybe I could operate a small carrier operation here that would shuttle flights to Atlanta?
Yeah. No, that's a good question. We had, with Mead & Hunt, the consultant that we currently have, we've kind of looked at that. But what we wanted to do, we kind of focused our energy into trying to get a major carrier, right now anyway. Now, once we do get a major carrier, that if we got somebody who's only going to do 2 flights a week, to, say, Orlando or somewhere like that, it would kind of interfere with the business that a major carrier would want when they got here. And so the approach that we're taking right now is to try to get a major carrier, somebody that has the funding, the ability to stay and sustain at our airport, instead of coming and going, which seemed to be, the way a lot of them had been in the past. We want somebody who comes to stay here for a while and to have the deep pockets, at least, like a major carrier does, to stay for a while. So that's kind of our goal. Now, once they get here, major carrier, then we can venture off and try to get somebody, a little smaller that would do like a junket to Myrtle Beach twice a week, Orlando twice a week. But if we do it now, it might hurt us in the long run if we try to get a major carrier. They might say, well, you've already got somebody. They're taking a lot of the business we would have had, and then they won't come. So that's kind of why we're kind of focused on this right now, doing it a little bit differently. But that was presented to us by Doug Blissett, who's our consultant with Mead and Hunts, and that's probably the best direction to go right now.
Mike, I'm sorry, I got to interject.
Yeah.
And one more thing about that is a major carrier means that they're flying into one of their hubs out of Athens, which makes the economics of their airport service here totally different than a charter flight carrier or somebody else, because they're actually pulling people away from their competition in Atlanta and taking them to their hub and putting them on their airplanes that are going all over the world, all over the country. So the economics are leveraged by the fact that they're pulling passengers out of our catchment area to take them on bigger, longer flights.
That is true, and one of the major carriers, of course, everybody has their own hubs. There's several of them we're talking to, but one in particular, I won't mention names, but they do have a major hub, and that's one of the things that's attractive in getting a major. So, what we're looking at is maybe a 50-seater, going to a major hub, and we really think we have a good chance. We really think that with the SCAVSTEP grant and the opportunity we have with the SCAVSTEP grant, that these major carriers are going to look at us. Now, also, as mentioned, we did a catchment area study. I did talk to several airlines, one in particular. They're very interested in that catchment area study. It's some good numbers that will really tell the story, that we're a contender. Everything seems to be just right, for us to get something. So we're just hoping that it does come to fruition.
Other questions from Mike? Andy?
I don't really have a question about this per se, but last time I was out at the airport and met with you was about November time, and we were talking about public art. Could you tell me where that is?
Yeah, we had, I'd asked Angela a couple weeks ago where that was. She had made a couple calls, and I think it seems to be a small department, and I guess they're real busy, but we still have that on the radar. Okay. We're still talking to them, and as soon as they're able, they're going to come out. Okay. And one item which I wanted to do was, if you remember, in the commercial terminal, we have the old airplane, Bennett's airplane hanging from the ceiling. There's a fella who had a home built at our airport now. It's an RV-8. It's a modern-looking airplane, but it's smaller, and but it looks really new and modern. So we wanted to hang that from the ceiling, right there in the main area, and kind of contrast the old to the new. And so that's something. Hopefully we'll have that up in a couple months.
Well, I know we'd also talked about the possibility of maybe having a restaurant or something out there.
That's my dream right there, yeah. I'd love to have a restaurant. That area, I think, is perfect. That's in the commercial terminal. The flight school is going to ramp up their business probably by half, and so that will add to it. I mean, we can get the Department of Defense, the fuel contract that we have, that will bring a lot more department or military folks in. So, yeah, my next step is to just kind of clean that up and then maybe do an RFP on that.
Okay, good.
Mike, do you mind telling us a little bit about the relationship with Athens Tech?
Yeah, that's a good question. When I first got here, as you all know, I had created or was able to help create in Rome a technical school through Georgia Northwestern Technical College. I was hoping to bring that here. Times have changed a good bit. We were able to do it in Rome. It seems here that things have shifted in that the assets and the capital that's going into these schools nowadays is not so much in new, it's what's existing. But that doesn't mean that we're on hold. We're still working through it, and I think one day maybe we can get that. But because of that, there's also a shortage in, from what I'm told by the state, there's a shortage of instructors, and so that's a big thing now. So the more schools that come on board, the harder it's going to be to get instructors, because they can make so much more working in the field for Delta or whoever than teaching. So that seems to be an issue as well. So once we get over those hurdles, I think we can move a little bit faster, but it's still something we want to do. It's still something that we feel would be beneficial. But that is some issues that we're dealing with right now.
Go forth and do well, Mike.
All right, well, thank you. I appreciate your time.
I also want to recognize, I think we've got the chair of the Airport Authority. Thanks for doing this. We appreciate your support. And now, Fire Department Chief Scarbrough is coming up for his own strategic plan.
Good evening. I want to share with you this evening our strategic plan that we've developed and a little bit about the process of how we have got to this point in the plan development. So, okay. All right. So the purpose of this strategic plan is really for us to look at how we can improve as a department with focusing on providing the best services to protect our community. We want to continually get better, and so we see a strategic plan as an opportunity to look for ways to improve our services and how we serve the community. So that's really the focus of what we have done with our strategic plan. The steps taken, there's two groups we engaged in the process, and one's external stakeholders, we'll call them, and the second group is internal stakeholders. The external, we had actually external stakeholder meeting, and the group you see at the bottom there, they were invited. I think we invited 21 of those folks, and 13 showed up for the actual day we did it over at the Linden House. We also did surveys. We used the website and social media to get input from the community, and we also looked at the 2018 National Citizen Survey Review to see if there's anything we could glean from that about feedback about us and our services. And then the second group was our department members, and we had about 30 of our department members that crossed all shifts, all ranks, all divisions. We wanted to be as inclusive and get as many folks as we could in there to get buy-in and have a say in how we develop this plan. So here's the history or the timeline of how this happened. So 2014 was really the last time before now that we did strategic planning. So in our FY19 budget, we put in their funding to actually develop the strategic plan, and it was, of course, approved. So in the fall, we got a contractor. It's the Center for Public Safety Excellence. So we're very happy with the product and how they worked with us through this process. It was very beneficial. We're happy with how they treated us as a customer. And then in November, December, we started working on some training about how to do it, planning, and we invited that stakeholder group, that external stakeholder group, to try to get them to come to that meeting. And then on January 28th of this year is when we had that stakeholder meeting, like I said, at Linden House. And we actually welcomed them, and then we left as the fire department said, we're going to leave you with our facilitators because if you've got something negative you want to say, we want to hear it. So we left after we kind of welcomed them to the training and let the facilitator work with them. And then the 29th, 30th, and 31st was our department stakeholder meeting. And I can tell you that the heavy lifting on this plan was done by this group. There was a lot of time, effort, and energy, and there was disagreement too. And but healthy disagreement, I'll just put it that way. So that happened over those 3 days. It was 3 full days of working on this plan. And then January through April, we did the surveys. And again, it was our social media, and we've got about a little over 7,000 followers on our social media. And we used the website too to do a survey, asking again for input from the community about our services and what we're doing. And then the end of April, we actually wrapped up the plan. So the main components of the plan are that we reviewed our mission statement, we looked at our core values, we identified our current programs and services that we're providing right now, we did a SWOT analysis, looked at critical issues and service gaps, and then we had this discussion that the manager will be really happy about. We talked about performance measurement and how you do that, and we're trying to spread that out in our department so more people in the department understand what we're trying to do in measuring performance. So we spent some time during those 3 days working on that. And then we developed goals and the related objectives. So one of the things we looked at was our mission statement, and the group said we need to change it. And so what you see before you is what the group developed. And I'll just point out to you, well, let me read it to you. Athens-Clarke County Fire and Emergency Services Department takes pride in providing prompt, dependable, and professional services to reduce the impact of emergencies in our community with dedication to education and training. And I think some key words in there, the group was really wanted to make sure it was part of this mission statement, and that's prompt, dependable, and professional. Our folks want to be those things to this community as we serve them. The other big piece of that is reducing the impact of emergencies. So everything we do, from responding to education to prevention kind of initiatives, inspections, all that's about reducing the impact of emergencies and in some cases, hopefully preventing them. So the group also looked at our core values, and those are our core values there. We have 5 of them: honesty, dependability, teamwork, professionalism, and camaraderie. They looked at those and said, you know what? That's who we are. That's who we want to be for this community. So we're going to leave our core values as they are. So they didn't change any of the core values we had already adopted. So next, the group identified what our primary services are. And those are the services that we provide. Now, the order of those services you see, that stakeholder group, that's the priority according to them. Fire suppression was number 1. Emergency medical responses were number 2. Technical rescue, which includes water rescue, confined space, those kind of things, that was number 3, on down. So that's their priority list they gave us and some of the feedback as far as what they saw, the most important services we provide. Ironically enough, 2 of the last 3 at the bottom down there, they are preventative things. They got pushed to the bottom and the responses got pushed to the top, which is normal. That happens. So 7 strategic initiatives were identified by the group. Again, based on the feedback that we received from the stakeholders group and the community. And you see them in front of you: recruiting, retention, internal communications, external communications, technology training, our 911 center, our relationship with them, and accreditation. From those initiatives, these are the 7 goals that the group created. And again, it addresses all those initiatives that were identified. I would say one out of those 7, probably the one source of feedback we got from the community that I feel like, based on the feedback, we can really focus on and do a little bit better with, has to do with engaging with the community even more. and I think goal number 2, enhancing department communications for better information and dissemination among shifts between and personnel. That's internal, but then strengthen community relationships throughout outreach and partnerships. So we already do that, but the community, I feel like said, we want more of that. So that's why that goal is up there, and we want to do that. So here's some of the community survey highlights that I want to share with you. So that map is, each of those colored areas represents a station area, their response zone. And then at the bottom, you see where the responses came in. There was 162 survey responses. Thank goodness they were spread out over all 9 stations, but we had, more responses than some of the stations, but it was countywide. And while I'm there, let me stop just a minute and tell you, I want to do more of this. I think there's tremendous value in taking time out to listen to the community. So we're excited by this. I want more responses, and we're going to look at how to get more responses, but we're pleased with what we got. So the first one was, we asked them, do you feel safe from fires at your business? And overwhelmingly, yes, they feel pretty safe from fires in their business. Now, kind of a parallel from the 2018 National Citizen Survey, first on the left you see overall feeling of safety, it was 68% positive. On the right side, safe downtown and commercial buildings, 87% positive. So the community feels pretty safe from fire in their businesses. And again, feeling safe from fire at your home. And again, an overwhelming response that they feel pretty safe. And then the 2018 survey was a 95% positive. So that's just perception, but I think that's perception based on some experiences and some things they've seen happen in the community. So we asked them, do you feel safe as far as medical emergencies? And again, pretty positive response there. I think it's about the first two, the top 2 choices they could pick is about 77%. So it's not as high as the fire, but it's pretty high. The 2018 survey was 84% positive as far as EMS and ambulance service. Us being engaged with the community, and this slide tells you what I told you a while ago, so it's not as high, it's spread out there. It's good, but it can be better, and that's one of the reasons we do this, is to find out these kind of things. So we're going to be looking for ways to engage with the community even more. Yes, sir.
So what exactly does being engaged with the community mean? Does that mean that people feel when they call 911 the fire truck's going to show up? Does that mean seeing you guys out on the street at community events? What exactly does that mean?
I think it's more community events. I think it's more engagement outside of the emergencies. They want to see us at community events and some other things, and we do those, but we're going to try to look at ways to increase that. But it's not emergencies. It's not emergency kind of events that we can be part of.
I guess I'm just kind of interested in seeing you when something's on fire. And from that standpoint, I mean, I understand the police department being engaged and such as that, but
right.
Well, the other thing
also, I mean, if you want to be engaged, but
Well, the other thing also that maybe Chief, you're going to talk about this is obviously the fire department doesn't just respond to fires, but you also provide EMT services,
Absolutely.
which is really important, which I think a lot of people in the community don't realize is the case. So.
Right. That's a good point. So we asked them about our overall response time. And again, it's very positive. I think it's 82, 83%. We're very positive. So they're pretty pleased with our, and that's all responses. That's fires, medical emergencies, hazmat calls. That's all the calls we respond to where we're responding in a hot mode. And then we ask them the overall impression of us, of our department, Athens-Clarke County Fire and Emergency Services Department. Again, I'm pretty pleased with that. It's like 83, 86%, something like that, the top 2 choices they picked. So they seem pretty happy with the services we're providing and what we're doing in the community. And if you look at the 2018 Citizen Survey, they scored us 93% positive on that. Emergency preparedness was 54%. That's something we're working on, actually. And then the fire prevention is 71% positive. And again, there's more hype and glamour about responding than it is going out and doing things to prevent those kind of events. So that's normal to get those kind of results back. So our next steps are to publish the plan, We're forming work groups. We already started forming work groups. We're going to prioritize those goals, start attacking each one. We'll assign a lead person to everyone who's accountable for making sure the next steps are taken to complete that goal in the next 5 years. We'll be looking for cost associated, and that will match our budget each year. And then we're going to continue to seek public input too, like I shared earlier. I just think there's tremendous value in listening to the community. So we're going to keep doing that. We won't do it every month because I would drive Jeff Montgomery crazy, but we're going to do a lot of that. And then we'll provide updates through the manager's office, through the snapshot publication that goes out, and also through our website and social media to keep folks updated about what's happening with the strategic plan and efforts that we're making.
Questions?
I have a question. Well, first of all, congratulations on your ISO rating.
Thank you.
Would you be interested in doing a citizens, let me get my words right, like the police department to have a police academy? Would you be interested in doing a community-wide?
Yes.
Okay.
That's probably one of the things that we're going to do as a result of this.
Okay.
Because we can engage with them in that way. Yes.
All right.
So are y'all having some of the same issues with recruiting and retention that we're seeing in our police department and our sheriff's department?
Yes and no, not to the degree they are, but I'll give you an example. 4 years ago, when we would put out, post jobs, we would get 350 applicants. And we wouldn't have any problem filling a recruit class of 12 to 15 firefighters in that. Our last time we posted, I think we had 150, 170. So it's cut in half there. And I think some of that is just the economy's doing better and there's jobs out there, I guess. But we are having some challenges, not to the degree that the police department's having, but we are having some recruiting issues.
I mean, I would argue that community engagement, can help with those. I mean, and I know y'all do, stuff for kids, the touch a truck and birthday party. I have a friend who had her little boy's birthday party at a fire station a week or so ago, and there were some cute pictures out there. I know those kids get a kick out of it. So I'm all about those.
We love it. We love seeing kids.
Now you make me feel bad about what I said.
Go to touch a truck.
I know, I forgot about
They'll
the
break
kids
your
lighting
heart.
the fire trucks. Excuse me.
Any others? Tim.
Yeah, just a question on the community survey. It just popped out to me on the emergency preparedness, how much lower that was. I mean, was part of that the way the question was, or was there any more details given on why that compared to everything else?
Well, I think it's just perception of how much effort we're making about emergency preparedness. And I'll give you an example. We're working on, and I think next month we'll have the kickoff meeting for a LAPC, Local Emergency Planning Committee. We've needed to have that. It's a tool that provides a lot of things for the community, including partnerships that we haven't had. So we're going to have that in place next month, actually, is the kickoff of that. So I think some of those kind of things that we've just got to push ourselves on with emergency preparedness.
And it seems to me it's a lot of it's about the perception, because after meeting with you and your crew and stuff to me, if I was to give that rating, I would give it the very highest score because I feel like you guys are pretty prepared. But it seems like compared to the fire and the EMS and stuff, there's just the perception there. So
I think you're right, and it's perception. Some of that's perception; it's not necessarily reality, but for people, perception is reality.
Hence why that community outreach is so important. So.
Yes.
Maybe just a lack of understanding about what that actually means, too.
It's true. Yes, I think that's fair.
Thank you so much for the work you do.
Certainly,
appreciate it. All right, we've got just I think it'll be a short executive session. Short.
Maybe.
You sure about that?